We're back at it again in Spellforce 3, the RPG RTS that's so good it's bad. In the previous part, after being put in prison for refusing to desert when ordered, double desertion, we were rescued by becoming the protagonist of an RPG. When the high priest of the new kill everyone because God said so religion that's taken the world by storm decided we were the chosen one. After granting us freedom and immortality as a side bonus, he asked us to cure a mysterious disease/curse that's currently ravaging the land. We found out/guessed that its source is an ancient telepathic pillar found in a hidden city. We got there easy enough, but we need to find 3 things before we can turn it off. However, we then got heavily distracted, helping refugees and overthrowing the crown, uniting the orcs, and saving the elves from a different disease/curse. Having now waded through massive amounts of optional content, it's time to truly appreciate how it's not going to be of any help at all as I prepare to actually do the main quest. The ostensible point of most of the last part's antics was that we needed to recruit armies to aid us in our quest. And while you do actually need 1, you don't need 3, which is hammered home by the army upgrade system. I talked before about finding random pieces of paper in the world that serve as the tech unlocks for the RTS battles. In our base, we can pay money to get them instead, and it's implied that what you're really doing is training your army to do these things, making more sense as a tech system than reading old notes found on corpses in the woods. The issue I'm getting at though is that the cost of getting these army upgrades is pretty high, and the RTS battles are the hard parts of the game. So I tended to never buy anything related to the RPG side of the game, all the gear and such, and only buy army upgrades. There isn't really enough money in the game to fully unlock more than 1 army. In fact, I think I never fully unlocked all the techs for the 1 army I was focusing on. So this makes it even less useful to have several armies, because if you ever feel like switching to try out another one, you lose access to all the techs and upgrades. Really feels like the techs should apply to all factions here, in that you get something analogous from every faction's tech tree when you buy an upgrade. The main point is that I dumped all of my cash into upgrading the elves, so I will now have to use the elves for the rest of the game ideally, and I'll render the previous hour of commentary even more optional than it already was by ignoring all of the orc and human stuff. Huzzah! Right, main quest. Here we come. Step 1 will be visit the Goblin King and feed him goblin flesh. Why? Because he gives you these potions which are essentially level ups. I got enough of these throughout the game that my main party ended up having pretty much maxed out stats in the relevant things. I'll briefly mention what I was doing with my hero build. Isgrim tanks, with most points put into passive tanking ability. Iria is a light mage with healing and utilities like cancelling enemy spells. Iana summons her doppelgangers for DPS, summons a 3rd stationary doppelganger that tanks and debuffs enemies, shoots stasis arrows that basically cast stop on enemies with a cooldown shorter than the status effect, i.e. it permanently disables enemies if you keep using it, even some bosses, and is also an archer for extra DPS. So yes, Iana's doing all of the work in this campaign, and Tahar summons undead as general help, and acts as the 2nd tank with loads of points put into Constitution and heading towards a build focused on regenerating health and heavy armor, while also being an archer for DPS. In the background there are some synergies going on, such as Iana's doppelgangers inflicting bleeding status effects, while Isgrim causes bleeding enemies to explode on melee hits. And over time more things like that came in. There are loads of bleeding based synergies in the game as it turns out, so that's a good status to focus on. Anyway, as you can see, this party of heroes ends up going to a desert, where we're fighting hordes of undead. This place features an ancient portal to the underworld, or some such thing, and the undead are constantly trying to invade the real world. The only reason the world still exists is that a permanent army is camped here to constantly fight them. Unfortunately, they recently lost their main fort, and the undead are making some decent progress. This is one of these weird little side stories that kind of brushes past you, like you just interact with this to do your main quest and then leave it alone. But it's such a big deal, this idea that humans have to 24/7 battle the undead to stop the apocalypse. It's like, isn't that like a whole game just happening off on the side right there? Anyway, we're just going to ignore all of the significance of this and how cool it is, because it actually doesn't matter. Long story short, we're going to have to bring the elven army here to sort everything out. And somewhere along the way, we need to find this magic stone, which I think is a treasure of the human guardians, and they might just give it to us if we help them out. So that's the actual relevance of all this. Forget the undead apocalypse, who cares? There was another route in this quest, not shown here, in which you could spurn the humans, the Iron Falcons as they're called, and do this quest with a Dark Elf mercenary force instead. I think this might actually be a consequential decision, although I can't be sure, as if you don't go along with the mercenary plan, which I didn't film because I forgot what it was, but I think it involved defiling tombs and plundering, that sort of thing, it might cause you later to have to fight the Dark Elf mercenary band because they appeared again in a couple of optional seeming situations. I have a choice here basically about how generous to be to the game about all this. I could assume there is a small branching path, or I could take my more cynical and perhaps safer approach by assuming the game would force you to fight the Dark Elves later, even if you helped them now. I was clearly cynical enough to not bother filming the sequence where you had to question people and make your decision and meet the Dark Elves, so I was probably beyond thinking that anything consequential was going to happen in the dialogue gameplay at this stage and was just ignoring it. Was I right? Again, I'm going to ask you to make the Offie pledge, in which I don't commit either way, but then you only remember me making whichever claim turned out to be true later. And by the way, one of the reasons I'm talking nonsense right now is that I have the liberty to do so on account of this RTS battle being perhaps the easiest in the game, and being an extremely welcome change of pace, in that it's not really on a timer like the other ones. We're entering the part of the game that I fondly remember as the gamey part, where RTS missions don't require you to fight an AI opponent, which brings the game's RTS and RPG portions more closely together. It's more like you're doing a quest where there are so many enemies you need an army to fight them. If the earlier battles were essentially full RTS mode, this is an RPG quest with RTS mechanics, potentially an example of the route to a true hybrid game, but it's the variety and the break from the chaos that I really liked. While the undead can raid you and put pressure on you like a skirmish AI, they don't have the economy or the will to expand, meaning you can advance against them at a leisurely pace in a more normal, scripted feeling Supreme Commander or old school RTS type way, where the AI can't beat you, you can only fail to beat it. Whether this is actually better or worse is hard to say, because really, you want the ability for the game to offer both experiences, and this game does, which is ultra rare. Again, it's so good that I'm going out of my way to complain about it. I think the devils are in the details here, but broadly, I'm grateful for the change of pace, perhaps in the same way that a man being pummeled with a length of lumber will appreciate switching to a novelty blow-up hammer once in a while. Yet, if they were only being beaten with a novelty blow-up hammer the whole time, they might question the purpose of the whole endeavour. And with the kind of analysis delivered that makes Offie the finest game commenter no one's ever heard of, let's look into this stage and find something else to complain about. Even well into the stage, I didn't make an army, expanding my PopCap but then not using it because things are so leisurely. I can use the heroes to do the objectives, which is to take out these towers around the map. The enemy attacks sometimes, mostly against a Shrine of Thorns I put towards the top of the map. I'm still pretty sure that using a Shrine of Thorns is the wrong call, but it's strong enough to fight these non-RTS units easily enough. In fact, easily enough, I don't even feel the need to look at the attack going on right now, spending my time fiddling with the economy in the background. It's very comfy, and it's really the kind of stage you/me wishes was at the beginning, because the slow pace gives you time to read the tooltips and think about what the texts do and compare costs and think about a build order. All the stuff that really I needed to have done before playing the last 3 battles at least. A while later, I've got my army yet still haven't done the objectives because there is an optional boss on this map that provides the real challenge. It was another one you needed to summon. But this time it gave you a few minutes of countdown before it shows up, implying you really needed to be ready to face it. So I sent a full PopCap army towards this thing, the legendary Humongous as Tahar names him.
That thing's humongous.
And we quickly see that half my army is killed, while the boss's health is actually going up. It's also got keywords making it immune to the permastasis trick with Iana, so I can't cheat this one. That's a problem, and mere seconds after my heroic attack began, I am bravely running away. I'm still not sure what's going on with this boss. or how I actually got out of this situation, despite having video footage of it. My theory is that this boss gets health restored based on how many units are burning nearby, or maybe how many are dying, which is why, when it burned half my army down, it got all its health back. However, now that I'm bravely running away, the flames it lays down mostly don't do anything, so I'm still damaging it with ranged attacks and siege attacks, plus I am slowing it down in its pursuit with my infinite supply of zombies and Ianas, and despite losing everything, the back quarter of the army is managing to do the whole fight after that on its own. And really, I'm not 100% sure what went wrong or right in each instance, but we get away with all of this. What I do know is that, as with all previous optional bosses, the reward for doing this is almost nothing, in that you get crafting parts that can only be used right at the end to make good gear, i.e. the time when you need good gear the least, as there's hardly any game left to use it in, and you have good gear already by then. Once again, the experience points really prove to be the main reward, but if you really want experience points, you can just AFK, especially in this battle, as your heroes get experience for killing regular enemies. Surprisingly, I never tried this. It's exactly the sort of thing that I would want to try, but while I noticed you could do it, I never attempted this. In theory, you could set up a battlefield situation where the enemy are contained and are throwing small attacks against an invincible defense, which gives experience to your heroes, in a fashion similar to good old Battle for Middle-earth. Perhaps though they would have put limits in place so you can't get that much XP from doing this, because developers usually don't let you have nice things like that. It can be nice for them to do this in that if they limit how much you can level up, it communicates that you aren't expected to level up, or at least stops you feeling like you're missing out by not doing it, and that's the sort of thing that afflicts me sometimes. Well, I'm mad at them, I'm glad at them, I'm the best you've ever had at them. It's more gameplay analysis in which the words maybe, I guess, I don't know, and they should have simply increased the budget to infinity are cutting to the core of another game's soul. And I think the reason, by the way, why I wouldn't have tried that exploit or just done some sort of AFK strategy to try and make things easier for me was because I wanted to get through the game faster. I have this vague memory that I was dreading the end of the game, being like, well, the beginning of the game put me under so much pressure and felt so difficult that it's going to be really hard at the end. And because I've apparently committed to filming the entire game, I don't want to have to embarrass myself later by taking ages to get through the hard stages and just replaying them over and over again. So because of that, I didn't want to spend any of my gaming time grinding. Even though that would theoretically make that easier, you might think, it's because I'm like, well, I don't want to spend more than 30 hours playing this game, so if the end is really hard and takes forever, I need to speedrun the beginning, which will also make the end harder, but the logic doesn't have to work. You're watching Offie D's Game Grounds. Again, home of the best gameplay commentary made based on vague memories of playing a game you'll ever find. While I was ranting, we've stormed forward and attacked the undead fort at the top of the map. You can use a catapult to open up a route for the Iron Falcons to aid you, and you can even donate resources to them to increase the size of their army. You don't really need to do this, as this is probably the easiest base attack you make in the entire game. Together, we absolutely swarm in and cut down whatever's in here. We end up at the door to the underworld, and it's quite a nice door. Why we haven't walled it off or something, I don't know, decided to leave it open. But there's a lot of noise coming from the inside, and that's the problem here. One of the Falcons realizes the magical seal is broken, and that the armies of hell are only a few seconds from storming the mortal realm. Luckily, we've got a couple of armies right here, and there is a spell this guy can cast to reseal the undead. So you need to survive for a few minutes while loads of enemies attack, with the added confusion that your units will drive into the undead realm during the fight, and you can't really see what's going on in there. I eventually pulled back to try and fight more on the mortal side, but the Falcon's AI still plows their units in all the same. There is a boss-like thing here that comes out, but luckily it was not immune to stun and stasis effects, so it mainly ended up just standing there. I think some of my regular units can apply stuns thanks to a blueprint upgrade I bought back in Milhandir, which adds to the stun-locking fun on top of Iana's antics. So while being a similar sort of creature, a giant thing, to the one that killed my whole army earlier, this one gets shut down and then gradually gets killed with minimal fuss. The Iron Falcon Keeper
sacrifices himself to power the spell, and the undead realm is sealed off once again. A Falcon officer says that they do have the magical thing we're looking for. It's on a shelf around here somewhere, and we can just take it, so mission accomplished. She also mentioned the thing that I was thinking about this mission, that sealing this gate and preventing the actual apocalypse is more impactful than the main quest, and indeed I agree. It's hard to say because we've got another classic case of everyone's favourite complaint, ludonarrative dissonance, in that while the story implies the bloodborne curse, bloodburn curse, is a big deal, and that extreme/moderately crazy measures are justified in trying to prevent it, such as releasing prisoners and allowing them to form giant private armies with no oversight. In the game world, the bloodburn is hardly mentioned, and quite possibly is never witnessed. It's definitely a real thing, like as your own party members know people who have died from it, such as Iana's ex. And without that, I would be tempted to say the whole thing is actually a conspiracy theory of some kind, as indeed it did turn out to be in that elf mission from earlier. That could have been a clue towards the conspiracy. Well, what we really need here is for the bloodburn, as it's the narrative focus and central issue of the game, to be in the gameplay in some way. Obviously it would be really annoying if your units could die of it or something, but I think it needs to be done. It reminds me of Command & Conquer, where a key part of the plot was that Tiberium crystals are toxic to humans, and you actually can get units killed by touching them. So we need something where there's some kind of hazard you need to play around, like Song Mist or something, where sometimes areas are made temporarily inaccessible or cause damage to you, or something, basically, like anything. At least the plot itself could also have the bloodburn be mentioned more as the main problem. Like we went to that massive city earlier, Everlight, and things were fine. Like no one cares about this curse over there. I don't know. What I am saying is that in that little side story, we stopped the literal end of the world that's been like brewing for thousands of years. Like that was the main plot of this world. We just solved it. But we can't even be convinced that we've done anything important. And we forego any particular reward for doing it as well. I mean, can I get some gold for doing that? Will someone pay us some gold for saving the universe? I've got pieces of paper to buy. Well, probably not. Speaking of rewards, you might have seen back there that the boss I killed dropped its loot on the other side of the magical barrier, so I couldn't pick it up. Hope it wasn't anything good. Could have been like a rare component that stopped me making something later. I certainly lacked all the random bits and pieces you need by the end to make all of the crafted gear I wanted. Well, what happened while I was ranting this time was I skipped a load of RPG questing, which ends in us stepping through a hidden portal in the Everlight countryside somewhere, which takes us to an island somewhere in the world that is cut off from wider civilization, yet is still inhabited by the ancient human culture that once ruled everything in the post-Shaper Dark Age, something like that. And they're embroiled in a civil war-like tiffle with a side serving of Medusae invasion that we're now going to step into. And yes, once again, we're getting into more stuff that's both ludo and narratively a bigger deal than the main plot, or has implications that it could be a bigger deal. But it's all just in service of finding the second magical thing stashed somewhere on that island, which might step us closer to solving that problem that theoretically exists, but we just haven't really come across it yet. Skipping over the setup here, we learn that there is a succession war on the island, and one party has summoned an infinite army of Medusae, who we now have to battle. It's actually more nuanced than that, and there are a few possibly fake choice moments where you have to choose who to believe in the specifics of what the people are arguing about, yet for the sake of time, I will skip over it, sped along by the fact I cynically suspect that all the details don't actually matter one bit in this quest. The snakes are spawning from altars all around the map, so to stop them, we'll rapidly colonize this place with our elven allies. We quickly build a large elf settlement bigger than the one the humans ever had here, and storm around killing off the spawners. Similar to the previous stage, it's really gamey and easy. Your heroes on their own are enough to do most of the work. You can optionally send resources to the humans once again, this time to power up their magical shield, which keeps snakes out of their village. This is really helpful, as keeping the humans alive is an actual objective this time. The main problem was an old classic: I wasn't paying attention. The shield has a timer that ticks down on the right,
and your donations buy extra time, but I didn't notice when it ran out, and the snakes got into the village. It's hard to see here, but we're now fighting them off, and although a large number of humans were killed, the only thing you need to do is keep the named NPCs alive, and they're standing in places that are harder to pathfind to, so they'll probably die last, naturally, very helpful. The way it works is the snakes gradually build up an army east of the village while the barrier is up. So if you let it fall, there will be a large and dangerous attack that takes a long time to defeat. In this way, this stage is harder than the previous one, while retaining the easy vibe of not having to face an AI army. And you can see me here having some difficulty holding my positions, mainly because I'm almost exclusively using my heroes. My pop cap is pretty much unused, and I've got resources in the bank, so this might be a case where I was microing the heroes so hard that I didn't have the time or attention width to make an army. It was also probably because I was booming, as they say, meaning I was putting all my resources into further resource production and expansion, and thus wasn't making any units. And this just about works because, well, as you can see, we just about win the fights with enough frantic hero micro, like always on the verge of game overing the whole time, and with towers to help us out, that makes a difference. Well, yeah, I was making things harder for myself than they needed to be, really, in service of things hopefully getting easier later as I ramp up to having a powerful economy sooner than usual, at the expense of basically dying the whole time along the way. Cut to some 20 minutes later, where I finally put an army together and cleared most of the map easily. You can't clear out all the altars yet, so you can't stop at least some of the attacks carrying on. Therefore, while our base defences handle those, I've taken my army to fight a grand battle with the Medusae army, which was gradually building up outside the now restored village shield. A messy battle ensues where the sum total of my army micro is to tell them to attack move. Ideally, I would move the melee guys to the front and stuff, and also switch some of the melee guardians to ranged mode to get more DPS. But I was busy using the heroes once again, and this is an example of something I mentioned in the last part, where if the game had been simpler, the gameplay wouldn't be simpler. Because there's so much to do in every second of gameplay that removing one mechanic just brings another one to the surface. To put it another way, if the skill ceiling is really high, you can bring it down or the floor up and there's still going to be a gap. Which I mention because awareness of the ceiling and the feeling that you can't master an activity because it's just so complicated can take away from the fun a little. But not for me. I love attack moving, and in meta terms, all this doesn't matter at all because you have so many resources that losses aren't relevant. We'll revisit this comment in the next strategy game I'm going to commentate on this channel, in which losses matter enormously and micro is not just king but emperor, but that's foreshadowing for another day. To conclude this thing, we spend a load of resources to activate a teleport portal to go back home, securing our exit basically. Then it lets you go to the previously inaccessible part of the map to the north, where the last of the Medusae spawners were hiding. Thus our blob finally secures the map for good. Then there's a chance to see the squabbling successes, talk it out, and you can sort of take a side. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that I picked all the options to be nice to the Pretender, who has his descent into madness, like all based on sympathetic reasons, and he was treated like garbage and such. Things like that. However, no matter how many times you avoid the fight him option, a fight happens because that's how the quest ends, like it's just another of those things. He's a boss of sorts, with 10 times more health than your average human. However, he lacks stasis immunity, so nothing happened for most of the fight basically. We just stood there and killed him, thanks Iana. After the fight, he is still alive and you can continue to avoid killing him, but he suddenly kills the other guy and then teleports away. Whether you can avoid that by being harsher, again I don't know. I want to believe there are alternate endings. I just don't believe that there are. Like, let me know in the comments if you know otherwise. One clue that all of this doesn't matter is that the dialogue to conclude the quest is something like, be that as it may, here's what you wanted. So like a dialogue line they can just slap on the end of any potential dialogue tree leading up to that. So even though the quest was actually to solve the island's problems, we got the legit guy killed, the Pretender is still at large, half the village was killed by snakes because I wasn't a very good commander, but the quest giver's just like, well, you did what you said you were going to do, like you ended the war, right? Like you made us lose the war, that ends the war I guess, okay right, that completes the quest, here you go, here's the reward. So Similar to the Iron Falcons, they did have the key to the Mohandia Nexus lying around here somewhere, and they give it to us. They also don't really know what it is. I think, like, to regular people, these ancient artifacts just look like shiny stones, because that's literally what they are. It's just lucky that somebody kept them around. I guess they're interesting enough that people have handed them down over thousands of years, and they're just on hand to give out to people who come by looking for them. Well, that's handy. We can now use the teleporter to go back to civilization. It's mentioned that the islanders could also use it, but they don't want to. So that ties up any potential plot consequences here, like sort of anyway. It's interesting because in the off-ED Subvert Everything rewrite of Spellforce 3, the bloodburn disease doesn't exist, but then opening this portal to the ancient Hibernian civilization would cause an actual disease to be spread to the mainland and kill everyone. I like the idea that the heroes of the tale actually caused the main evil they are fighting, and they have to awkwardly tiptoe around that fact. And you know what? Spellforce 3 is going to very slightly go there later on, so that'll be something. For now, we're done. In my mind, there was another thing we had to find. However, my next clip is of us activating the Nexus, so maybe not. Were there only 2 magical things to find after all? There are 3 slots on the Nexus. Did I forget to film some large part of the game? Can I even remember anything about this game? All of these questions are high up in the air as we plough on into the plot. As the Nexus is reactivated, potentially allowing us to see who is telepathically killing people, allegedly, off-screen, with no gameplay consequences and almost no plot consequences. Snark, snark, snark. With the Nexus turned on, Iskrim manages to work the controls in some unspecified manner to get Tahar connected to this ancient Shaper 5G network. Then Tahar just needs to think really hard about the strange signal, and he should be able to detect where it's coming from. Apparently, we've decided he should be able to do this. He listens, and hears someone asking for his help, and also his own father calling him a failure. Given the extreme levels of neglect implied in Tahar's childhood, you might think this is actually his own memory. However, plot-wise, Tahar is basically ironclad. He's the one guy in the game who doesn't have any trauma issues. So this vision is actually coming from the sender of the telepathic signal. Tahar says he heard some drips of water in the background, and one of the characters I flippantly ignored, immediately, equally flippantly, claims he knows exactly where that is. It's Dad's old shed, basically, a secret base he built beneath a swamp back in the day. If the signal is coming from there, then old bad Dad may have been behind it all along, so we'll go bust in and investigate. The game tells you this is a point of no return before you leave, hence we enter the Devin presuming the game is about to end era of the gameplay commentary. Most games only throw these messages out when it's about to hit you with the last quest. But actually it's a temporary plot locking going on here. There's loads more game and open world stuff after this, and well, I'll just be surprised by that happening basically. Especially because the main plot threads of the game we've seen so far do end here in this quest, so it's like this is where they could have ended the game, but there's a load more as it turns out. We'll see. We go to this swamp, and we're met by our old pal Bertrand, who says that the royal army under Geralt somehow found out about our intentions, and so did the Purity Church. One way or another, everyone discovered the source of the signal at the same time as us, heavily implying we've got some serious information leaks, or that there was some other easier method of finding the signal, but we'll ignore that just as hard as we're about to ignore the fact that the Purity are going to fight on our side in this mission. Yes, it's hard to recall after all the drama, but we are still working directly beneath Lycain, head of the church, and he personally shows up to help you fight the crown in this mission. Tahar does briefly mention the contradiction, that we are 100% his enemy and we've been fighting his forces in brutal battles, but Bertrand explains that the hardcore Bane army we fought and the main Purity army are different. The real Purity isn't so extreme and genocidal yet, so there's nothing to worry about today. Furthermore, Lycain hasn't cottoned on to the fact that me and my whole team are the literal defilers preventing the return of God, and while he may suspect that, and indeed may be plotting to kill us, he accidentally made us immortal, so that's going to be a problem for him soon enough. Well, he can't stop us, he'll just have to deal with that eventually. Before we can enter the lab, Geralt intervenes. He still wants to arrest us for that desertion from a while back,
And we can complain about it all being that guy Anselm's fault. Geralt then shoots us down in a slightly incorrect way. He rants about how we refused to exterminate that village back then because we believed the words of an elven traitor. To play the hero, we're not so different, you and I, and so on. But if you recall, I actually went the route where Tahar agrees to carry out the exterminators, and then the desertion thing was a misunderstanding arising from an unrelated issue with Anselm's sister. And it all got twisted up in such a way that it's now very clear there was one true plot thread and I just wasn't on it. Perhaps the dialogue here should have been a bit different if you picked that option, because if you really get into the reeds of what happened back then, all the witnesses to the conversations we're talking about died, including those who even know about the elven rumours that Geralt is talking to you about here, so I don't know, it possibly fuels Geralt not knowing what actually happened, and that could excuse the dialogue here being wrong to immediately reverse my criticism. It's too confusing, it's too long ago, let's not mind it. Geralt still comes across here as being pretty correct in his assessment of you and the situation, and even correctly notices that Lekain is a threat to the crown with his private army and plans to genocide half the crown's taxpayers. So Geralt's pretty anti-purity because of that. He was even coming here to investigate the Bloodburn and probably would have found the cause, same as we're about to. Overall, the secret plot of the game is that Geralt is the main character. He was right about everything. As expected, a fight breaks out, but Geralt is not immune to Yenna's stasis effect, therefore there soon is not much of a fight at all. You really think it'll be that easy? Geralt cries as he stands perfectly still, being given the absolute Caesar treatment by a load of mage-hating priests and their new immortal mage friends. As Geralt falls, Tahar remarks it was his choice, perhaps reinforcing that Geralt was the main character, and this provides a meta-explanation for why Tahar's choices never affect the plot. You aren't even the main character, and Geralt appears to have chosen the high road that gets you killed ending. We'll let him reload a save and pick options where he believes Tahar was loyal, and the whole game goes very differently from the beginning. Whereas we carry on to see how working with Fantasy Hitler is going to play out for us. There's a dungeon section where you fight through hordes of undead in your dad's shed, eventually coming to an ominous door, where the telepathic signal is very strong. Lekain says that only Tahar can enter this next room, because it's God's will, or some hand-waving excuse, and I just agree. Iria's like, that's crazy, she doesn't want you to agree with Lekain, but I'm too broken to challenge the plot at this stage. I'll just do whatever it seems like it's bending me towards doing. In the room, we meet Andra, a blue, bald, 9-foot woman floating in the air who almost immediately claims to be Tahar's mother. On that bombshell, the game fades to black for like 1 second in order to skip Andra explaining what she's talking about. But the gist one can pick up anyway is that Tahar is a clone of Andra, who herself is one of the handful of surviving Shapers who Dad had trapped in his basement this whole time. And that's why Tahar was able to access Mulhandir and connect to the ancient Wi-Fi. He's half Shaper, although the baldness, blueness and tallness seem to have all passed him by. She says that while the rest of the Shapers were killed off long ago by disease, she was cryogenically frozen, in a sense, to travel to the future where hopefully a cure for the disease would exist. Unfortunately, the disease killed literally everyone else back then, bar a few mind-broken prisoners we met earlier. But also, we'll meet a talking dragon who heavily contradicts Andra's account, and we'll get to that later. The point is, though, she was asleep for thousands of years in a secret chamber beneath Dad's shed. He's discovered this at some point and wanted to create a new living Shaper by cloning her. That didn't work, and it created us instead. But we got selected for greatness by the God Squad because of some favourable dreams by Fantasy Hitler, and then managed to connect ourselves to the Shaper Wi-Fi by military might and a bunch of overlapping conveniences of history, and here we are, reunited with our mother, who now tells us the answer behind all of this Bloodburn nonsense. It was an innocent mistake.
Yes, looks like both our parents have been up to no good, as it turns out. You see, Andra's plan was to use a telekinetic signal to summon someone to come rescue her from this basement. What she didn't realise were the two big weaknesses in this plan. One, that no one who heard the signal understood any of what she was saying, and two, getting brain invaded like this often killed people. And that's what the so-called Bloodburn really was, just a byproduct of mentally downloading a weird 3,000-year-old vocal solo about being trapped in a basement, which in some way caused myriad symptoms and swiftly death in a manner similar to a bacterial infection, causing the confusion. Then, Andra is struck by an orbital laser and stops floating, which quickly turns out to be Lekain's doing. Yes, turns out he was up to something. He has sucked out Andra's essence, whatever that means, because the whole prophecy from a dream required it. I think our role in the prophecy was to lead Lekain to this source of ancient magic, the Archfire. This is the Shaper magic, and it's the key ingredient to get God to come back. According to a dream, of course, you need this Archfire to open a gateway of some kind. However, as I mentioned in part 1, Lekain is also quite a nice guy. Not only did he actually transfer Andra's life force into an amulet, such that she isn't dead and can still be revived, he also didn't kill the rest of our party, preferring to use sleeping gas on them or something. That will prove to be another stupid move that helps us enormously. There is a brief one-on-one duel with Lekain, but he can't withstand all the zombies we're summoning, so he uses his new Archfire magic to send us flying off while he teleports away or something. And we wake up back in the base with the whole party alive again, because it turns out we were all rescued off-screen by the main army. The Purity troops fled and left us and the party unguarded because they were afraid the Archfire magic causes the sky to rain fire or something when used, just temporarily for a bit. And they ran off because of that, and then our army noticed that happening, marched over here, and saved us. So that was that really, we got away with it and everything went back to the status quo. Tahar gets some new abilities as a result of being exposed to Archfire, which will prove very juicy later. I picked the Black Magic extension, there are various options you can pick. And this will allow the summoning of Devourers. You can also use your player character, by the way, as an RTS mage of sorts. I haven't talked about this because I never wanted to dabble in it, but there are loads of spells which only do things during RTS battles, such as give you resources, repair buildings, speed up production, those sorts of things. I never took any of these, because I wanted the more general purpose ones, and more importantly, I knew for a fact I wouldn't have the micro to actually use them. Given how much stuff I was already not managing to stay on top of in those battles, having an even faster build order might actually be a problem for me. No, I shall use my magic not to build, only to destroy, and we'll see some more of that in action later. Just mentioning it because it's an interesting way to link the RPG and RTS sides of the game together, the thing I'm claiming the game doesn't do enough. But it wasn't interesting enough that I actually did it, I guess, so, well, that's the end of that. I think there was a good idea that might have actually solved some problems there in the design somewhere, but not like weaved in enough to actually make a difference. Well, the idea is a good start. I think with a bit of experience, using an RTS mage as your main character might actually be an interesting and really powerful setup, but we'll never know. Back into the action now, because what's happening is the Purity are attacking our secret base, probably not that secret given the amount of armies coming and going from it. Well, they've got in somehow, and now we have a nice RPG segment where you need to kill off the Purity army across the map, but it's not an RTS battle. What a relief. We can have some more gamey fun in this one. Just a set challenge, you do it with your heroes. The leader of the Royal Army is in this fray, fighting bare-handed for some reason. Yes, there is a decent chunk of the human army that doesn't like the Purity, and they're now on our side, like the sides have been divided. You can even take their commander as a character in your party, I seem to recall, but I never even came close to doing so. We're sticking with the Iria, Iana, Iskrim setup, and now is the time to call back to something I mentioned a long time ago in the first part. The game/plot might have been changed in the Reforced edition a bit. I was looking through the footage, and I totally didn't film the majority of this quest, which is annoying because I was planning to rant about how the intended mechanics didn't seem to work. But I never let a lack of showing what I'm talking about stop me, do I? So here's that rant anyway. At the start, the dialogue implies this mission will involve defending the central area. You can see on the minimap we've got a bunch of stuff there, loads of allied units. You're supposed to be defending a tower, I think there, that Iskrim was supposed to stay behind and man, and that tower could shoot enemies. Or something, in huge all caps. Because what actually happened was Iskrim came with us, and none of that stuff happened. There's no tower defense aspect, we don't have to go back and defend or split our army or anything like that. It even gives you a bunch of RTS units to use to defend the base, but I just didn't do anything with them because they're just standing there doing absolutely nothing. And I think it all might just be because at some point, perhaps in the Reforced Edition update, they let you take Iskrim in your party instead of having him be a plot character here, or a scripted character. So, while the enemy are spawning waves for the tower defense segment, those waves spawn near the edges of the map and just walk towards the hero party instead, meaning that in effect, you just fight a bit more stuff as you walk around clearing the map, and you don't do whatever the game was intending, but afterwards the dialogue's like, I can't believe we did it, we defended the tower, as if you had done something. I allege that some huge mishap has happened here, and I'm not going to prove it in any way, like any good allegation. I also allege that some of the human commander Arendir's voice lines sounded really like they'd been re-recorded or redubbed or something, so something was changing around this part of the game in the Reforced Edition, I think, or just late in development. The long story short is that all of the attack waves just happened somewhere else on the map, not at the place you're supposed to defend, and it was just like 10 RTS units that would spawn at the edge of the map and run at you, and our hero party was good enough to kill that by now, so we easily wipe out the entire Purity army without even using our own army, very embarrassing for a lot of them. And along the way, we noticed that one of the noble houses, Utran, was providing troops to help the Purity, and the royal commander Arendir says that it's because of some mind control Lekain has going on, which he knows because the ruler of Utran is his sister, Mira, and she's been acting weird recently, something like that. I mentioned before, there is some noble drama between various houses in the background, and it's going to come to the fore a bit now. However, I also mentioned that this is when I was convinced the game was going to end, and that's why I'm going to become even more flippant and vague in my descriptions, because I really wasn't paying attention to this. I was kind of done with this game, like I was fatigued, I was stressed. I didn't like the RTS sections enough that I just really didn't want another one to happen. And I didn't want to play in case the next thing that happened, like the next play session, contained one of those battles. That was my mindset right now. I was expecting the final showdown of the game to come like at any minute, because we're kind of there, aren't we? Like, it could just be like, now we'll storm Lekain's base and kill him, because we know he's the big bad guy, we've got our heroes together, the world's united with us against the evil side and stuff, we've got our special power through the Archfire. It's time to do it, isn't it? And this is vaguely what happens, only it's a really slow process with a build-up over many, many missions, which turns out to be a substantial portion of the game, including a load more optional stuff. And that was made clear to me when what happens next is the party goes, I guess we'll need an even stronger army now to face the Purity, and we're invited to go back and recruit the elves, humans and orcs again, which gives you access to their tier 3 units and extra techs if you complete them. I was so ready for the game to end that this was a nasty surprise. Like, I was well past skipping all the dialogue and stuff because I just wanted to see what happened in the end. I was really checked out. I didn't become checked in again until later when I think things picked up. But I think that picking up was mainly linked to me getting so used to the RTS battles that I was no longer dreading having to actually pull them off. Well, here we are, we're back in Elfland, we're doing this again. What do we got? Would you believe it? There's literally another corruption causing disease and death, and given that the last time we were here, they had that problem and they said it had happened before, it seems it just keeps happening. Well, this one is particularly bad, and is compounded by the fact that we have the Purity here, bringing their army to carry out an exterminatus of the elven population, as they were before, but just even more so now. So it's a very similar setup to the previous elf mission, but on a different map. We gotta kill the enemies, gotta investigate the corruption, which in this case is like a big cloud that kills you towards the bottom of the map. However, I wasn't so quick to begin this mission, both because I didn't want the RTS portion to start, and because I was eager to try some exploits that usually fail, and I usually haven't talked about them failing, but on this map they did actually work, so we'll take a look. What am I up to here? My zombies and newly unlocked Devourer summon, that demon creature thing, have crossed the Iron Curtain. We saw in part 1 that usually when you summon a unit in a place you aren't supposed to go yet in the progression of a quest, it automatically summons them at your feet instead. On this map, that doesn't happen, allowing you to summon units on the other side of these walls that block off the west side of the map. Over there, the Purity army is just chilling, waiting for the battle to start, and we strike a key blow against them there by taking out one of their sector buildings. That's a nice feedback loop suppressor that will slow their early game very nicely. We also benefit from running around to see where their bases are, and which locations are defended, sighting towers and static rush defense armies around the place. The zombies are too slow to advance like this, and the Devourer can't do all that much on its own. However, I do kill off a bunch of random units and buildings by infinitely resummoning the Devourer, another case where the summon cooldown is low enough and the cost is low enough that you can pretty much always have a Devourer on the field. I was distracted during this by discovering another kind of summon, a summoning circle boss, as I fight this one. I should note that Tahar's Archfire Black Magic upgrade also gives him an ability called Dark Seed, which causes a chosen enemy to take about 1 attack's worth of damage every time they incur a status effect. This turned into this infinite synergy, because on top of the stasis and silence effects that Iana and Iria apply in their usual rotation, Iana's doppelgangers are applying bleed with their regular attacks, and Iskrim is removing bleed with his regular attacks via that magic thing where his target takes explosive damage if it's bleeding. I mentioned that before, I think. And then bleed is immediately reapplied by the doppelgangers, which triggers Tahar's Dark Seed to do some more damage. Meaning we're doing a lot of damage, that's what I'm saying. Like, the effect here just constantly re-triggers itself over and over again more than is probably intended. Not sure if I had it yet, but Iria also has this move that allows you to heal when you attack a chosen enemy, and you can make that enemy a boss, so you're constantly regenerating health during combat. Combined with healing spells, which have now been upgraded with low cooldowns, low costs, and big areas of effect, means that our heroes and our summons are constantly being replenished and just rarely die or take that much damage at all. I'm not even bothering to not stand in the enemy's area of effect burn damage thing this time. However, after we killed that thing, it immediately came back, and I wonder if this is because we fought it in the summoning circle. I fought it again and it died vaguely towards the edge of the circle, and that was permanent. It seems like there's a rule here I don't fully understand, yet we're so powerful it doesn't even matter. Then it's back to seeing what I can see on the enemy side of the map. It turned out there was a whole load of stuff you needed to do before the battle started, including going off to complete a different map, which also happened in the first Elven battle, as you might recall. We'll skip to the end of all those quests to see this cosmic coincidence that might explain why my exploiting works on this map. The plot involves bringing a dark elf to the fog that kills you, so they can summon a devourer to scout the inside. Truly, I was one step ahead of the game here, and there's a chance that this cutscene requiring something to be summoned in an unusual place is the reason summoning restrictions are weakened on this map. It's just strange that this exact technique I was gloriously pioneering turned out to be the actual plot not long after. Speaking of the plot, we learned that this corruption is being caused by the elven leader we were working for in the first mission. He probably has his reasons, and we'll learn them later. But this is another case that hints towards my Offidi subversive rewrite. If you remember in the first part, I noted that the real cause of the elven corruption was really obvious and wasn't anything new, and the elven leader was standing a stone's throw from the source of the problem in plain view, while claiming not to know what caused it. And he was saying, the gods have forsaken us, we must change our ways, as his explanation, which altogether could be interpreted as a deliberate plot to seize power and wield more religious authority by exploiting the corruption or even deliberately causing it. Evidenced now by the fact the same man is proven to have the ability to cause corruption in some way. Now, I don't think that's what they were going for, just giving you my conspiracy theory for your consideration. Looks like the battle has started, and we're getting to the point when I'm more on top of how to play the early game. As was ranted before, being good at the first minute is the prerequisite for being good at anything else that happens, so this is great. We have half the map under our control in just a couple of minutes, and because the map is divided east to west by bridges and choke points, having big undefended areas isn't that bad. My master plan was to capture and build up the area I denied to the enemy with my exploit. It was some logic I attempted in the first Elven mission as well, where I thought having a base close to the enemy's main base would draw in all of their attacks and focus things down on one spot. This doesn't work at all, as the AI carried on being good in that it probes all the different spots it can attack and then makes large attacks wherever you aren't visibly standing. Therefore, the great grind began, and while this battle is again a never-ending microfest with constant action once things ramp up, it wasn't so dire as in previous cases, because I got my army built earlier and we have an extremely good economy, with me finally learning to boom and get buildings in the back lines faster than before. And the extremely choke-pointed nature of the map means that there are essentially only two places we need to put towers and troops to lock down more than half of the resources. The margin of safety there where I'll eventually win on resources if we trade well for the next 5 hours. So we've got that in the bag. But I was more aggressive than that, and a mere 5 minutes later, we're pushing out after breaking the enemy's first big attack. I'm trying to take something from them, and we do take out one of their sectors, but as usual, they counterattack once my army is out of position, now trying to take the place I wanted them to take before, when I'm no longer ready for them. Very outrageous. The Purity also have access to these giant iron golems they can make, which just swamp the battlefield with their huge health bars and make things difficult for us. I guess this is the human faction, or the Purity faction's tier 3 unit. We're in the tier 3 part of the game at this stage. I've also unlocked superior units for the elves, although I didn't make much use of them. Like, the 3 tiers are basic, iron costing, and blue stuff costing, the blue stuff being the rarest resource, Lenya I think it was called. It's hard to harvest, and I tended to stick to spamming tier 2 units, the iron ones, because iron is easier to get. But yes, at tier 3 you can bring out healers and wizards and get techs that upgrade a load of things. Doesn't matter all that much. In fact, you can see that I have loads of idle workers and piles of unused resources, while also being nearly pop-capped. We've got everything right now, despite the constant chaos and never getting a chance to breathe. This is going really well. The only reason our advantages aren't really amounting to anything is that I can't pressure the enemy enough. What I need to do here is use those workers and resources to have more unit production, and then just attack relentlessly and take losses to build some momentum. Instead, I sit on the resources and attack more cautiously, not for any strategic reason really, but because it's easier to micro that way. It just fits on the screen, stuff like that. I did place my rally point on the front lines, so we're feeding things into the grinder a bit, but I'm not really managing the build queues very well, or at all, but basically just spamming out random units with no thought for what the army composition is going to be, and I could be pushing harder and progressing faster at the expense of a higher casualty rate. Casualty rate doesn't matter at all. However, I am a nice guy, so I tend to keep my army alive just for the sake of it. Despite the fact I have mastered black magic and I summon demons, I do necromancy, I'm a nice guy. Like, overall, whatever the enemy's propaganda is saying about me, it's almost certainly true. Just a peek into my sick and twisted mind. Sheathes katana and walks away. Yes, I was thinking of another plot subversion here, basically, because you can kind of roleplay as being an actual, like, evil overlord like your father was, and doing all of the bad things that the Purity says are bad, and they actually are bad. Like, I actually am summoning the undead, summoning devourers, planting the seed of darkness in people so that if they bleed, it hurts more. I don't know, I'm spreading disease, death, desolation. I am absolutely defiling the dead. I'm worthy of my title of defiler. Maybe the Purity were right. I'm trying to force a subversive plot onto this game. But it can't happen because Tahar is actually just a nice guy in the plot. It doesn't matter how many dark and arcane powers you give him. Doesn't matter to what extent he is the Antichrist. He will only use those powers for good. He only uses them against more evil people than himself, and therefore it turns out to be fine. I vote for the guy who summons demons on the regular, but he's doing it for a good cause. He may kill people just to extract their experience points, whatever that means, and he may then not allow the dead to rest by constantly raising them to join his ranks in his never-ending conquest of the world, where he's making this big private army for some reason. He just seems like a really nice guy, and he's got this really wholesome relationship with these 3 women who look exactly the same and are addicted to killing people. The perfect hero. There is actually a serious point in there somewhere, in that it's one of these cases where the game is like, well, your opponents are evil, but you never see them doing anything evil. It's just implied that they are. Like, Lekain had 1 guy imprisoned, or 2 people actually imprisoned on suspicion of being a mage or something like that, so, you know, that's a bit bad. And I guess people keep saying the Purity are going to genocide the elves, that's why we're fighting for them, but you never see them doing it. Like, even on the previous map when there was an elven village, they didn't attack it, they just attack you. So there is still a possibility that you're the bad guy and you've completely misinterpreted everything that's going on in this plot, and I like to believe that could be the case. Now we're in a good position because my pushes have netted me most of the map. In fact, we have bases adjacent to the enemy capital now. We're overflowing with resources, we've got a maxed out army, and we've recently destroyed many enemy armies. This is the situation where in most RTS games or RTS matches, you've already won. However, the strange thing about Spellforce is that even though you have all the advantages, it's still hard to win because the AI is absolutely ferocious and probably is also cheating. I was talking in previous battles about how I could get to the point of nearly winning, then have a 40-minute continuous battle to actually drive the last little bit into the enemy base because they were making so many units all the time. And here, it's something similar, and I guess I didn't expect that as I got my attack in earlier and was generally more aware of what was going on. It felt like things were going better. Capturing the forward area took about 20 minutes, from the beginning of the stage that is, but then I've got 27 more minutes of footage of me advancing from here the rest of the distance because the enemy economy clearly got up to full power, and they were somehow able to produce armies at roughly the rate they were losing them, possibly with the magic of cheats of course. This is combined with the fact I ended up bisecting their territory, which you might think is good, but it complicated matters. Their capital sector is isolated now, but my army can't take it. There's just too much spam coming out of it at all times, and it takes too long to kill buildings, so we're getting swamped with units over there. Meanwhile in the south, they have several sectors that are counterattacking in two places, over and over. I ended up going south to try and stem that tide, managing to take out some production buildings down there while ultra-fortifying the entrance to the enemy capital and constantly losing and replacing the towers there as a way of fighting them off while dedicating PopCap to taking out the southern bases. Eventually I was able to return my focus to the capital for a 10-minute mega battle, but yes, it was pretty exhausting. One thing that's holding me back though is the same weakness we've seen me employing before. No siege weapons. I don't have anti-building weapons, most likely again because they're stuck in some arbitrarily long build queues that I'm not paying attention to somewhere in a building on the map, and somewhere else on the map there's a barracks with like 50 phalanx guys in the build queue who always come out first whenever there's PopCap space available, and that halts my queues in other buildings and means they only trickle out their stuff sometimes. I don't know the details of course, but I suspect that was part of the reason my control over my army composition was limited, on top of the fact I was hardly trying to control my composition to begin with. It's a game where you're so busy I'd love to see some global recruitment options, or even better, just an army ratio bar that your economy will automatically provide you. That is to say, I would indicate I want 100 pop of archers, 50 of spearmen and 50 of siege, and the game would manage that for me and send them to a rally point or something and just keep the ratios at the right level on my behalf. The unit rosters are simple enough that I think a system like that is achievable and would probably gel better with the manic and non-stop chaos of conducting an advance. But yes, you're supposed to just do that yourself, and my solution to me needing to get good is I'm just asking the game itself to get good instead. I ranted about something similar here when I was playing StarCraft. There's something that sucks about getting good at using a flawed system. I don't want to get good and manage my build queues properly here, because I know how much easier it could be if things were done a bit differently, and I suspect it would be more fun that way, so I don't want to commit to the way I think would be unfun. It's like, the reason you suck, and the system requires so much skill to use, is because the system isn't fit for purpose or doesn't work all that well. That's the same thing I was ranting about in StarCraft. No idea what it was, but one big example of such a thing, an example of such a mechanic in a lot of games, is the camera being too zoomed in. That's a simple one really. It always reduces your level of control and access to information and requires you get more skill to play the game because the camera's zoomed in. It just makes it harder. Even this footage feels so claustrophobic. There's so much constantly happening on the edges of the screens or just off screen, evidently, and bases and armies don't fit on the screen. This game's absolutely begging for a higher zoom out level, and that's one simple example of a system that doesn't quite work, that requires you to be more skilled with your camera hotkeying and paying attention to things and remembering things that might be happening off screen at any given time, stuff like that. It doesn't have to be like this. So while you could argue the intended challenge of the game is to get good at it despite these problems, you're supposed to be thinking, oh, I'll go back and check my build queues during the fight, and have the skill and the micro and the APM to do that. I look at it from a different perspective and think, but what if it wasn't like that? That's not an interesting challenge. That's not the fun part of the game, learning to do that. So it's not interesting to get good. Which reminds me of another adage I like to throw out in these sorts of situations. You don't have to tell people to get good at a game that is good. To put it another way, if people are having fun, then they will keep playing the game, they will keep getting more experienced, and they won't have time to go and complain about the game being too hard or something, because they're having too much fun. They're not feeling that it's hard, they're enjoying that it's difficult, so they'll probably not go and complain about it. So you won't have to tell them to get good. There's some sort of situation here where a large amount of the player base claiming a game is too hard isn't necessarily an indication of the game being too hard, but it's an indication of there being a problem with something. It might just be that the game isn't good enough, not necessarily that it's too hard, because people will happily get good at difficult games, which is why things like the Dark Souls series has been successful. Although, of course, that's also the origin of the whole get good meme, so there's clearly something wrong with it. It's clearly not quite fun enough to get good at Dark Souls. What am I talking about? I just want them to let me zoom the camera out. Like, you're my therapist once again. If they had let me zoom the camera out in so many games, this timeline would be so different. I wouldn't be so insane. The point is, we win the battle, even with the camera zoomed in, so I must be a god gamer. Yet there is no pride in victory, for we live in the camera zoomed in timeline, and that is the ultimate defeat. Well, we've solved the problem, haven't we? Maybe. After the battle, I went to explore the rest of the map, and there was this incident where I got game overed because my hero party accidentally passed through the fog that kills you while I wasn't paying attention. Very nice. Luckily, I had an autosave from after the battle, so I didn't have to go back into the nightmare. And now, we're going to solve the corruption. How? Well, before we tried summoning a Devourer to go investigate the fog, but the Devourer died. What if we had an even bigger Devourer? That's what our plan comes down to, and we have to sacrifice the Elven second-in-command to summon it. Another case of the side plot having higher stakes than the main plot. The game never asked me to sacrifice anything to solve the Bloodburn, even though that would have been a really cool/annoying idea, as I ranted about previously. Our new Devourer destroys a crystal that was powering the corruption spell, then has a brief one-sided boss fight with a thing, and we eventually come in and ask the Elven leader what all that nonsense was about. The answer is, it was some bullshit. He says something like he wanted to prove to the people that the gods are dangerous by showing off some of the dangerous magic they enable, hoping people would be more respectful towards the gods as a result. And I think my conspiracy theory from a few minutes ago is actually true. I just wasn't paying attention to the game, basically. Like, upon rereading this dialogue, I think he's talking about the fog that kills you, but maybe it also implies that his idea of, like, pulling a stunt to strike the fear of God into people was also what was happening the previous times the corruptions took over the Elven lands. I'm not quite sure, because it also kind of implies that the weird beast we fought that came out of the crystal was controlling his mind, and maybe that was behind the thing. I've got questions, clearly, but before we can truly clarify things, he just dies mid-conversation, and we are left with a leaderless Elven people who were subjected to many tribulations in order to get them to straighten their backs and praise the gods harder, but maybe it was actually a power grab or a stunt by a curmudgeonly old man who thinks the kids are too noisy these days. Or maybe it was all the work of a crystallized demon from the Hibernian age waging war on the elves for being servants of the very gods that are the demon's enemies. And maybe no rewrite is required because all of the conspiracies I wanted the game to do are actually here. I was just too shell-shocked from 20 minutes of RTS micro to know what was happening, and I accidentally skipped over some dialogue without reading it in the footage there. So overall, you know my plot analyses are absolutely top-notch. I guess the overall point is that the elves like us more, unlocking their full roster for the rest of the game. And while the characters don't even mention this, we also prevented a potential genocide. Yes, we might have stopped that fog that kills you, but no one's talking about how we stopped the legion of huge iron golem creatures that also kill you, and they have legs, making them really more of a threat than the completely static fog in an uninhabited area. It's like this part was written such that the battle could have been either just anything or not been included at all, which makes me even more mad that the battle was so intense. At least it went relatively well this time, and it looks like I was starting to get good enough at the game to manage, if not completely overcome, the RTS challenges. With the elves saved, it's probably time to go save the humans and orcs, right? Well, not this time, I'm not falling for it. We're fully investing in the elves here, and now I knew I was never going to use the other factions. I can skip their missions and dump all of my money into buying the millions of available RTS upgrades for the elves, which, as I mentioned before, only further encourages you to not use the other factions. I also fully respect Tahar to make him into a full tank character. You get given respec potions for free pretty often, and I did respec the others a couple of times just to get better versions of the same sort of build with wiser ability choices. For Tahar, he goes full tank with armor, giving him regenerating health and health on kills, a fast attack dagger that inflicts bleed for the synergy thing I mentioned before, and a top-tier shield that altogether makes him block 100% of damage 40% of the time, and the other 60% of the time he blocks 50% of damage thanks to his heavy armor's base effects. On average, let's call it 75% of damage avoided and 25% countered by constantly regenerating health. He's invincible! Well, we'll see about that. I also got better versions of his summoning ability, so he can summon skeleton soldiers instead of zombies, which are overall better, and more powerful devourers. There's also something going on in the build using auras, which is a mechanic that sometimes lets you transmit perks from one character to the others, but I'll show that off later once I have more of them. Next, I did this optional RPG-only quest, which was really good, and unlocked the super units for all of the factions. So for us, that's the Treant, the same giant talking tree we fought ages ago back in part 1. Maybe we'll see that guy later. Soon, though, it is back to the war, unfortunately, and this is where the slow burn approach to taking down the Purity comes into play. For the next battle, we need to conquer the Iskander Wilds again, now controlled by the Purity, but we're only doing this because this territory is close to the lands of House Utran, and we want to draw Utran out into battle in order to capture or somehow get to their leader, Lady Mira, and tear her away from the Purity to weaken their alliance and weaken Lakain's hand overall. And obviously I'm just thinking, can't we just kill Lakain, like right now? I nearly did it before. I'm probably starting to swallow the game isn't about to end pill at this stage and realise we're not really near the end after all. Really felt like we were for a short time. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention is that my build now also involves, I think it's Iana, having the ability to summon wild creatures automatically, like as a passive during combat. So sometimes you'll see like bears fighting on our side. That's because of that. Just even more summoning stuff was going on. Now this battle goes a little differently to normal because you start with a decent army already, and as we saw, I just rushed across the map immediately. I charged out and cleared out a bunch of Purity bases all the way to the other side of the map. Right away, like a couple of minutes after the stage started, we already had most of the map under our control. And you might be thinking the north edge doesn't look very under control, but there is an impassable barrier there, which we'll see more of in a second. So we actually have a very strong position. And the enemy only attacked us one time. Like, after about 15 minutes, the enemy economy is good enough they can send spam stuff against you. But after defeating just one army, my army was still strong enough that I immediately counterattacked and took out what was probably their main production area. And what we didn't see was counter spam to slow me down to the extent I couldn't do this. It seems I am outproducing the enemy for once here. And this push is going to go all the way south and take out almost all of the enemy's remaining territory, except for the castle itself. They didn't make another army after this, so we only had to fight them seriously one time, and well, it's already over, it went really well. A massive change from the other battles and all the stuff I was ranting about before. One thing that's different is I have my iron spent and I've got my workers doing something. Somewhere along the way, I worked out how to do the build order and the micro, the very thing I was basically moaning about never wanting to find out how to do. It must have been just before this, but I do remember at some point during my campaign, I went into the skirmish mode with the elves and practiced a build order. I say practicing, I guess I mean just working out what it was at all. I had got the gist that the early game economy for the elves is very wood limited, so making loads of woodcutters immediately when the stage starts is very helpful. And it must have been during that skirmish stage that I inspected what was happening with the economy up close and realised some of the things I was ranting about somewhere in part 1. One such breakthrough being the idea you can make your buildings without workers, and then as workers are generated, they will immediately go in and start filling the empty slots, which means you never have idle workers and things just get started faster. Also allows your builder workers, who are sort of slightly different to the other workers, to be doing something even when they otherwise wouldn't have something to build because you don't have workers to man the thing they're building. Essentially, just set down what you want your base to look like in the future, as long as you can afford it, that is, because the other thing I had discovered was that whole debt system I'd ranted about before. As long as you don't go into the negatives on your resources, especially early on, things just happen way faster. And yes, this battle was putting that into practice, where within 15 minutes, we had the entire map under control, totally boomed, way more resources than I could ever spend, way more workers spare than I need to do anything. We just completely dominated really early on. This is how you're supposed to play the game. I have done it, it seems. Although, partially I've done it because This map doesn't use the full map, so it's faster to take over everything, and also the enemy's capital sector doesn't have resources in it. So it was hard for the enemy to do what we saw in the previous battles, where like you take most of the map, but then they're still making really powerful armies constantly, just from a tiny amount of territory, because they didn't have any income, as far as I could tell, in their final territory, so I was safe to kind of siege them out and play things a bit slower and gradually fight my way in. It's a case of the classic RTS conundrum what's going on here, because balancing in a positive feedback loop game is always going to be impossible, and in RTSs you tend to get the perhaps not wanted effect, where the better you are at the game, the easier the game is, and it's not just like, oh, it's easier because you're better at it. No, it's easier in a more objective sort of way. So I won easily here because I only had to fight 100 popcaps worth of units instead of like 5,000, which I usually do. Being 2 minutes faster in the early game, i.e. being good, just deleted the rest of the challenge for me. So I end up with the strange situation where I didn't get good at fighting 5,000 popcap of stuff. Like, that's the normal get good at a game approach you might want to think about, but here the game's easier because it just didn't offer me the challenge. I was too good to be given the challenge, therefore I don't need to be good enough to do the challenge. Another way of thinking about it is, if you are so good at a game that you know that clicking on easy mode makes it easier, then that's what makes you good at the game. Like, I'm good at the game because I know easy mode is easier. I succeed more because I clicked on easy mode. So there's a kind of undermining of the challenge here, because if you get too good at the game, you just don't have to play it anymore, and then it's fine. This is the case in a lot of games, really, where like being good at it means basically skipping stuff. And this is very pronounced often in RTS games. Like, you could maybe make a vague analogy, like if you're playing Bloodborne and you're good enough that you don't take damage, that means you don't have to heal, you don't have to grind to get healing items, and because you're not healing, you're less likely to take further damage because like you don't have to do the healing animations, you have more time to attack, more time to just look at the enemy and see what they're doing. The game is easier if you don't take damage, therefore not taking damage is cheating because it cuts out the challenge of having to play the game after having taken damage and having to deal with that. Now that's a very weak claim, but in RTSs, I think it becomes a very strong claim, like, I didn't have to play this stage basically. That's why it was easy. I just didn't face the challenge because I was too good to be given the challenge. Thus, this will always arise in positive feedback loop RTSs. However, if they did anything differently, I would be mad. It's an unsolvable problem, I often call it, because I really hate when games like XCOM, for example, which I always dump on for doing this, has hidden mechanics that will punish you for doing too well, which is what some developers try to do to stop this positive feedback loop challenge elimination thing taking place. I'm dumping on the very idea of being good, basically, at feedback loop games, because being good at them means not being good at the things that are hard about them. It means skipping what's hard about them instead, which is a lot like just clicking the easy mode button and having it automatically be skipped or something like that in another kind of game. Well, you can put it another way, can't you? You can say, if your goal is to just win, and you win by having barely any obstacles, then your choice to do whatever it took to have barely any obstacles was the best strategy, so you are the best at the game. The pinnacle of skill is to not face any challenges. This is what Sun Tzu would say. He'd say, like, yes, it's fine to win by just skipping all of the enemy armies, and if you do face an enemy army that has like 5,000 popcap of units, don't actually play the game, you quit the game, you go and set fire to the developer's house, and maybe something will change because of that. You know, there's a lot to learn from the ancient classics, and very little to learn from Off-ED's Game Grounds. Well, there was a fight at the end, so there was something that happened, a very messy advance, because the routes into the castle you had to take are tiny, and even Off-ED got killed at one point, so he's less invincible than I claimed. The paths tended to be blocked by the Purity's golems, and here's where relying mostly on ranged units becomes essential, as a melee army here would do approximately nothing. I slightly alleviated the choke pointing by attacking from two sides, and when we get into the courtyard, we can squeeze around the buildings, just like when we took this castle from Geralt in the first part. Once you have the castle, you are told the enemy will counterattack in 10 minutes, giving you time to neaten up your army and cover the whole map in towers. You can tell pretty easily where the counterattacks will be from, as the northern part of the map is walled off, with 2 or 3 gateways. Essentially the enemy will be pouring out of those, so I mostly towered up the forward positions. I was excited for this because In frantic APME RTSs, defending is so much easier and feels more like you're playing a game. I remember trying to explain this idea of mine in Company of Heroes, where the rare defensive missions are so action-packed, and you're so in control of that action and just enjoying it, that it feels really satisfying, whereas attacking is more like trying to round up a load of mad chickens running all over the place with so many moving parts and constantly noticing that things have gone worse than expected because you didn't have time to pay close attention to something. So like you're always disappointed in yourself at all times. You can see how much better you could be playing. Whereas when you're defending, the micro's easy enough that you can actually do it perfectly and feel pretty good about it. I don't know. Well, I'm going to save that kind of ranting for my next game when it's going to become like a real case study of such a thing. Just you wait, I've got this real strategy game loser pile of brainworms that I've been stacking up for a while. I'll deliver that to you in the future. For now, we can actually avoid all of these brewing rants, because once all of my defenses were ready, things took an unexpected turn. All our stuff gets turned over to the AI, an allied AI that is. And first, it's panic-inducing, of course, because they're going to ruin my precious plans. However, it's also nice to do something new here, a change of pace, I don't know. Let them fight the battle for me. You take only your heroes, and you need to attack the enemy camp alone, while their army is distracted fighting your former setup. There's this brief quest with smuggling tunnels to get inside, and then effectively we've got this interesting soft time limit going. You need to fight your way towards the HQ area before your allies die off. And even though my allies repositioned all my units into worse places, the attacks thrown against them are really, really small compared to the usual RTS stuff. I don't know how much time you actually have here, probably infinite. I think the enemy would never get past us. But I do like the idea of having a soft time limit be created in this organic way that's gameplay related. And probably the reason why it feels like this is no time limit at all is as a reward for placing so many towers in the correct places and having loads of units. So I'm not going to moan that this part's really easy, even though it is. I want to be happy that it let me make it too easy via my own effort. That's part of the positive feedback design ranting again, a point like that, so let's just move on before I degenerate once more. Even with only our heroes, clearing the path is easy. I guess not only our heroes, because you probably noticed the crowd of summons we have coming alongside us now. There is a brief boss-like encounter against two Lightbringers, who are purity superhuman soldiers with like 10 times more health than regular hero units. But being humanoid opponents, they tend to be vulnerable to status effects, so I sit there pouring everything on them all the time. That's in contrast to like demons or ghosts, who often have this ethereal keyword attached to them that makes them immune to many of my usual shenanigans. It takes a long time to kill those guys, but since they can't outdamage my healing, we do win eventually. And they drop another Ancient Shaper rune. This one is being used to mind control Lady Mira of Utran, as her brother suspected. She's actually standing nearby, and you can use the rune to order her to break her alliance with the Purity, thus quickly achieving our overall strategic objective. However, we might want to be nice and break the mind control altogether, which brings us quickly back to the Nexus at Malhandir, a place that has the tools to break runes effectively, and we're about to do it, but Isgrim has a better idea. We can use this rune to reverse engineer the mind control powers, and then mind control everyone. That was one of the Shaper's big things. They liked having slaves and such, and they had the ability to correct dissident ideas among all of their people using mind control to maintain political stability. And Isgrim promises he'll only use this power for good if we let him have it. And sure, we could easily solve all our problems with a bit of mind control. The question is, would this mind control cause any problems? And do we trust Isgrim to be the emperor of the universe, like all of a sudden? This really just comes out of nowhere. And it becomes such a disagreement that you have the option of killing him. Unfortunately, his bleed damage synergies are too good, so he must live. And this turns out to be one of the limited times when taking the non-violent dialogue choice actually doesn't just cause a fight anyway. Isgrim is convinced that we need to destroy the rune, so that Mira can get her mind back, and then we'll use her army to save the world from Lycain. A bit of manipulation required, but no full-on mind control, and if anyone tries to stop us, we'll threaten to kill them with our massive army. Manipulation, not mind control. So it's all above board. Isgrim says he'll destroy this rune, but he will be making others later, and you can't challenge him on this. So he wants to take over the world, and we're just going to have to let him. I don't know if this is because that's what happens in the other games, and this is a prequel to the other games. Maybe someone told me in the comments in the first part. I don't know. Isgrim lives because his bleed synergies are too good. I don't care if he's going to control my mind and completely take over the world. That's fine. With that, part of our grand plan is somewhat completed, although Mirror never really goes back to normal after the mind control is broken, so it wasn't that perfect. The other thing you need to do before you can move against the Purity properly is go and investigate the soul harvesting facility where they put people's souls into big suits of armor to make all of those iron golems we keep having to fight. However, you also hear a rumor that a dragon is causing problems out in the desert, and I was highly distracted by going to investigate this. It turns out that doing this moderately pointless side quest before attacking the Golem Soul Trap lab specifically is a really good idea, so I stumbled into the correct choice of mission order, as we'll soon see. Here's a random little point. I stumbled across the fact that most merchants have a secret second stock you can access with a tab on the right. I totally didn't realize that until now, and who knows what kinds of gear and items I've been missing because of that. But since I spent all my money on the RTS upgrades anyway, I guess it wouldn't have made that much difference to know about this. Is there any use in having there be 2 pages there though? Probably not. Might as well just be 1, or some UI stuff needs to be injected in here to highlight that there are tabs. I probably thought those shapes were window decorations or something and never noticed them. Next, we meet a dragon, and the quest was to hunt this dragon, yet it turns out to be the other case in the game basically, where it gives you the choice to fight or talk, but the talking option doesn't lead to the fight option eventually. So you can actually branch things out a little bit. And well, this dragon mentions it's here to kill us, so that's not a good start to the negotiations, because it's aware that we're going to take over the world and ruin everything because we're reviving Shaper Magitech, and because Tahar is part Shaper himself. And yes, I agree, I guess, especially if Isgrim has anything to do with it. We are sort of planning on ruining everything. The dragon claims that Shaper civilization was destroyed by a dragon invasion, because the dragons saw the Shapers were ruining the world with their mind control powers and enslaving everyone and such, so they decided to get rid of them and let things carry on from there. And this contradicts the claims we heard earlier, where the Shapers were supposedly so powerful they could control even the dragons. I think it explicitly said they controlled the dragons at one point. And their civilization was supposed to have been destroyed by a scourge, some kind of disease. So who do we believe on this? Our own mother, who was an eyewitness of the events in question, she gave us the Shaper side of the story, or a talking dragon we just met, who, in between threatening to kill us, tells us this contradicting story. Well, I'll let you decide who to believe. Either there is a real in-universe controversy about the real history. Maybe the Shapers are embarrassed or something, that they got, schooled by the dragons at some point for being so immoral and things like that. So they pretended to be wiped out by a disease. To the extent one can pretend to be wiped out by a disease, I don't know what actually happened. Is our mother lying to us? Is there a plot inconsistency? Or could it be the secret extra option in any Off-ED question? Is Off-ED just remembering everything incorrectly? Well, that's never happened before, as far as I remember. Anyway, the dragon's duty is to destroy threats to the world which the gods themselves aren't able to deal with, so this guy's pretty high and mighty, and I think there are other dragons somewhere working for him. But I can get off the hook here for a very cheap price, as it turns out. I can prove I'm not that bad if I close some rifts to the Shadow Realm in certain locations. And as it will turn out, those rifts are at the same place the Iron Golems are being made for that next mission I mentioned. So we can actually prevent another disaster along the way of the main quest. The dragon was even like, "The world is tired of life." So the dragons might have even been planning to wipe the slate clean and just destroy everything and start again. Did we just accidentally avert the 3rd apocalypse we've averted so far in this game? I don't know. And by the way, I did say it's a talking dragon, but actually it's more like telepathy. So for all their claimed power to decide the fate of the world and make decisions the gods can't make, there's still something the foolish mortals can do that they can't. Is it all jealousy? There's more subversive rewrite potential here. And speaking of foolish mortals, some dragon hunters come over and have a go at defeating our new friend, only to get obliterated instantly. We'll be off then. Unfortunately, when you go to the next map for the Iron Golem soul trapping mission, the RTS portion starts right away. I think there was a guy standing at the entrance who you could avoid talking to delay the start and maybe get some exploration in, but I foolishly talked to this NPC, and then suddenly we're starting the assault with no intel and no exploits whatsoever. It's also one of the few places in the game where it commits the faux pas of making you do conversations during the RTS phase, which slows you down, of course, especially in that critical opening minute. So there's some kind of plot and intrigue going on here where we're learning about what the Purity have been doing in their mad magi-science experiments, but I pretty much had to skip over it because I don't have time for that. As long as I kill everything that has a red health bar, we'll be fine, I presume. There's even a village on this map, as I recall, where you can go and pick up RPG-style side quests in the middle of the RTS battle, and you totally don't have time for that. So, it just feels like you needed to explore this map before the battle, basically, similar to how it works on the other maps. Too late for should-haves. I need woodcutters and to frantically work out where all of the sector capture locations are. For this battle, things are starting to fall into place. My experience and comfort with running the economy has been building and building, to the point when there's no longer any choice paralysis or anxiety that I'm making the wrong moves all the time. So that's making the game more enjoyable, but more importantly, our heroes are overpowered. This is where battles become a lot more manageable, because we've reached a point when our heroes can kill the enemy blobs on their own, with the phrase on their own being used liberally because we're able to do this by virtue of summoning so much stuff. Yes, we barely have any more health than we did in the early game, so all my previous complaints about us being squishy do still apply, but armor and armor providing auras are reducing incoming damage by a lot, by like half in Tahar's case as I mentioned, and a lot of the incoming damage is going on to the Devourer, the Skeleton Warriors, the Ianas, the Iana decoy summon, and the random wolves, bears and panthers that constantly appear out of nowhere to fight with us, thanks to some equipment perk someone in the party has somewhere. And all of those health pools are infinite, functionally, because as long as they don't die really fast, we can make another one whenever we need, combined with better offensive abilities like Iria getting this Area of Effect spell, and having more and more mana regeneration and related auras all overlapping. We can just spam everything all the time, creating battles like we just saw, where it's a huge mess of effects and we grind through entire enemy armies somehow, with our heroes taking serious damage occasionally, but as long as I'm looking, I can keep them alive. That's the real challenge now, just knowing what to look at. I need to keep up with the economy micro too, because being able to rush with heroes in the early game is a massive advantage, but it does mean you'll have a slower early game at home. Then again, denying the enemy their early game by taking bases and deleting armies, forcing them to spend resources rebuying them instead of upgrading their back lines, that's going to be worth a lot. An unknown amount, but probably a lot. You can also see one of those rifts the dragon wants us to close. They constantly spawn demons to attack you until you close them, and you might think there is some kind of spell or thing you need to seal them up. Nope, they're just enemies, and you can melee attack them closed. Stab it until it dies, get experience points, move on, the one-size-fits-all solution to all of life's problems. So, it's rush, 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 and it really works. We're gradually building an army while on a constant offensive, and the enemy can't get any momentum going. I even saw them trying to do their usual thing, where they make an army to counterattack in a different location. But they appeared to get close and then reassigned to defending, so they ran back again. So my relatively open and exposed arc of territory is somehow getting away with it all this time, unlike other battles, and I think the sheer pressure we're putting on the AI has finally turned the tables. I have the initiative. The fights are going well enough that leaving them to brew while I do the economy also seems fine, and broadly speaking, this is it. This is what a successful approach to battle looks like. And yes, it's all because we have these massively powerful heroes, whereas the enemy heroes, well, they're in there somewhere. They're basically just slightly longer health bars among the rabble at this point. They don't really use abilities like you do. So they're just getting stomped, along with everyone else really, and getting fed to my giant hell demon, all because they believe in a religion that, as far as we know, is correct. I mean, the head of their church granted us immortality, and it actually works, so I don't know, I'm sure we're not the baddies here. To be fair, the enemy are enslaving people's souls to make their golems, and that's pretty much the exact kind of thing they claim to want to stop happening. That was the whole point of this new church. Well, basically being a regular peasant in this world is very politically difficult. You are screwed in a new and unique way, no matter who you root for. And the most likely outcome of any conflict between anyone is that you die. New subversive rewrite idea should be that some guy called Kiel Mix appears and tells the peasants that the crown, the church, and the new demon lord Tahar and his mind-controlling dwarf companion are all exploiting the regular people for their own gain. Well, actually, demon lord Tahar is only exploiting the elven people. So with just a little bit of racism, we can convince ourselves he is the true hero of the story. Anyway, our rush goes on for about half an hour until we finally stabilize in the familiar situation of us controlling most of the map and resources, and the enemy still somehow have enough power to out-recruit their losses and begin to fight back continuously. We end up facing serious counterattacks from their capital sector, and I'm sure I lost an entire PopCap's worth of army during this middle portion where we grind over the sectors near the capital, ruining my momentum. And then everything's back to normal basically, where it's just the usual grind. The last 2 or 3 sectors will take another 20 minutes to get through. And one thing to mention, by the way, is that somewhere along the way my hero ability spam gained this ability where the enemies will suddenly die if they get a certain combination of status effects while having low health. It's something like that. Some special extra synergy went in there. And that spam setup, where I just use all of my abilities all the time, triggers whatever this thing is. In practice, it causes the enemies to have 25% less health. That's the way to make it simple, think about it simply. Just one more thing that helped our heroes do most of the work. We eventually get the enemy down to 1 sector with an army guarding both entrances. While our heroes go to seal the deal with the Dragon Pact, the enemy attacks really calmed down by the end, making me think they might have actually run low on resources this time. Especially as we rushed so hard, they must have had less time to stockpile than in previous battles that went on forever from this point. So, the final grind was once again only 20 minutes instead of 40 minutes. But it still felt a bit too difficult. I think the real solution to all of these problems is have a higher pop cap. That's my master consultancy thing, because you can't deploy your strength. So being really strong compared to the enemy still doesn't help. It's still hard to win once you have a massive advantage because you're just pop capped all the time and you have way more resources than you can spend. Anyway, it's now time to attack the enemy base, or move the enemy base specifically. It was filled with static defenses. The humans have these bombard towers, to use the Age of Empires parlance, making them pretty fortified when given time to set those up. But we have our elven super unit, a massive tree that will tear down even the most fortified position, just as Tolkien intended. This guy is really expensive, costing 75 I think of the hard-to-find Nenya resource. And I have no idea if it's worth using on balance. Seems pretty good right here, I guess, but in this chaos there's really no telling what's working or what's good value. One thing we can tell is that we're still, despite having all the cards in our hand, on the verge of game over, which is why this game really keeps you on your toes, because the enemy buildings can still easily kill our heroes if they happen to be targeted, and I really need to pay attention to that. I could leave the heroes outside of the base to avoid all risk. However, I like to live dangerously, it seems, or more likely. I'm using the all units dynamic hotkey to give orders, which includes heroes, and hence they charge into the very center of the action every time I give a command. Thus, I'm lazy enough to only want to attack move, which causes me to require constant micro to keep the heroes alive. Everyone loses, including the enemy, because we eventually win the battle. The few seconds of calm after the 50-minute endless brawl with a full 20 minutes of rush before the first break in the fighting is really something. The contrast, the come down, the relief, the feeling that you're now free to open your eyes and look at the map, see past the strategic model and think about what's actually happening. I don't know why I'm so traumatized by this RTS gameplay. Even though we always win, and we win by huge margins, and we're not even save scumming anymore, it's going absolutely fine, but it's still somehow this burden. I think I really enjoy the peaceful RPG side of the game, even though if the RTS side was a game on its own, I would really enjoy that as well. It's the synergy here that's somehow clashing in a very top-level, directorial, vibes-based way. And if you don't really know what I'm talking about, then welcome to the club. There's an RPG segment where you infiltrate this castle, the same castle we infiltrated about an hour ago in this video, the one where Daddy Tahar's lab was. Well, what I thought happened here was we found the Iron Golem factory inside the lab and stopped it. However, that isn't at all what happens. Yes, the prophecy is fulfilled. Offie D really did incorrectly remember what happens. Me from a couple of days ago was right. You might argue that this shouldn't happen because I can check the footage, but I'm just skimming it so damn hard in this tiny window where I can't read all the text. So it's all vague memories, this commentary. Because in life, vague memories, well, that's all you end up with in the end, eh? The point is, the mission didn't address the Iron Golem problem. So what is it about? Well, we're actually here to fight Lady Leonida here, who we met for like 3 frames here and there previously in the story. She's part of the noble houses and the plot lines I've been ignoring, but yeah, she explains she had a similar mission from God to Lacane, and that's why she's helping the Purity with her armies and her part of the world. We're back at it again with the peaceful dialogue options leading to a fight thing, and then we end up fighting her in this boss fight. Not much of a fight because, well, Leonida's just being hit by every status effect in the game at all times, and is being juggled around by a never-ending barrage of attacks from our huge summon-augmented party, so we win. Then, for a last-minute happy ending, another Leonida officer appears, and says there is an anti-purity streak in the Leonida army, and they will join our assault on Lacane. So I guess that's what we needed from this battle, but doesn't actually do anything. Again, we're strong enough to already take on Lacane, and this plot-required 10-hour power-up montage with these missions just isn't mechanically justified in my opinion. An absolutely amazing way it could be justified could be if completing the missions that supposedly expand your army actually gave you a higher pop cap, and the final stages are then hard enough that you need a 400 pop cap army to win, something like that. This would make more ludonarrative sense, but as it stands, we're doing all this stuff to weaken the enemy and strengthen our faction, but we just know it's going to be in the final battle the same hero party and 200 pop of elven soldiers we've been using the entire game to do the final fight. Nothing's changing because of this. The game has stopped. We're just waiting for this to be over to use what we had already 10 hours ago to finish the game, that sort of situation. And combined with me kind of wanting the game to end because I wasn't finding it that enjoyable in the middle part of the game, well, it really made it feel like filler content, and perhaps that contributes to me not even remembering why these battles are happening or what's happening in the game broadly. The next thing we do is go tell the dragon that our work is done, and the dragon rewards us by giving us a level up somehow, and agrees that they won't kill us, so that's pretty good. Do we have to live in fear that a dragon, who probably still might kill us, is watching us at all times? Unfortunately not. What they really should have done is allow you to ally with the dragon and have it save you in the final battle or something. Because something to that effect is shown happening in the opening cutscene of the game, to be fair, if you remember the very start of part 1. Oh well, what happens next is what I thought had already happened. We attack the Iron Golem factory, and to further confuse my memory, this mission begins the same way as the previous one did, with an NPC at the edge of the map asking to speak with you. However, I learned my lesson from last time and quickly ran past that guy to get as much exploration in as possible. This turned out to not be massively useful, as the paths out of the top left area were blocked off until the battle starts. Still, we gather a bit of intel, fail the usual exploit, and then go talk to the guy. He explains how people's souls are being harvested, but he escaped, which I think kind of also happened at the start of the last mission, further muddying my memories. I just don't know what's going on anymore. A normal battle starts, it doesn't matter, just capture the map and move on. It's a slow start because we have no godstones to teleport to and no idea where the capture flags are. So I don't do anything clever here. I kept the heroes together and just moved forward to claim sectors slowly. Luckily, it was a bit more generous than the previous battle, in which the enemy started with massive control of the map. Here, there are loads of empty sectors, so pushing forwards doesn't immediately lead to an endless grinding battle, just a couple of little ones here and there. It takes about 15 minutes for the enemy AI to get into its groove again, and then we're back to blob wars. But we're certainly ahead, and probably reached our pop cap quicker, with the enemy armies being much smaller than ours at this early stage, and that means it's time to push as hard as we can and make the most of it. The enemy are trying to do their counterattack thing to distract me, but I'm heavily ignoring them while I obliterate their bases. There is a Bane base you can kill here, which is separate to the Purity base, and if they were considered two different factions in the game, then killing one off hopefully halves the maximum pop cap of units you might be facing in this battle, so that's a nice early win. After that, we roll on. It's a more leisurely time, it seems. Like before, early in the game, it was a 40-minute grind to advance. Then that last battle was like a 20-minute grind. This time we're down to about 15 minutes of easy advance, just like storming through taking territory, and then a 15-minute grind in which things are still going better than usual. Like, we're winning pretty hard, pushing all the way across the map. Of course, that's not necessarily anything new. Like, usually I get most of the way across the map and then get stuck and start complaining in my commentary. Not this time though. The entire stage was only about 30 minutes, and after getting our army together, like at the halfway point, I was able to move it all the way across the map and take out the enemy capital without facing the huge upstream battles I've been complaining about. As speculated before, I think it's the advantage of sheer speed. The slower you play, the larger the stockpile of resources the AI builds up. And then when it's under pressure, it uses that stockpile to focus on unit production and causes the waterfall of constant fighting once they're nearly dead that lasts a surprising amount of time. Or perhaps we're simply just so powerful now with our overpowered heroes among the army that we're killing the enemy so fast I'm not even noticing the waterfall anymore. Something has changed and things are better. This battle proves to be one of the easiest in the game so far, and we absolutely stormed to victory. I remembered towards the end of the game, I stopped wishing the game would end, and I think battle experiences like this would have been why. This felt much better than the usual grind, because you get the same result with the same kind of action gameplay and like the same decisions are made in your mind, just fewer times. It's all delivered faster. It's another positive feedback loop curse really, isn't it? Because if I was playing worse, I would get the same gameplay and the same result, but I would have less fun doing so, if only by virtue of it being more repetitive and taking longer to kill a fully built up AI versus one you've successfully rushed. But what you actually do mechanically in the game is the same in both cases. The decisions are the same, the route to victory is going to be the same. It's just that if you have to fight the enemy army 10 times instead of 3 times, I don't know, you're just doing the same thing more times, right? Like, you're not really changing anything. So, I don't know, maybe this is why RTS campaigns generally do use scripted AI and set challenges, rather than like real RTS match style battles that are out of the developer's control. Because from a game design perspective, making an RTS match style battle into some kind of carefully crafted experience where like you pace things and give the player set challenges in a set order and try to teach them things like that, you just can't. You're letting the feedback loops loose to define the game experience, and this will cause you to give the hardest content to the worst players, the easiest content to the best players. There's nothing you can do about that. Everyone complains that it's too hard or too easy. Balancing becomes impossible. Offie has a mental breakdown on the internet about how much he hated playing this game, that he voluntarily kept playing under no duress whatsoever, and even came around to wishing it was longer by the end of it. And the dreaded feedback loop is the core engine of all this madness, and my source for that claim is that it came to me in a dream, of course. And I think we see more of the causes of the dreamlike state, because now we have a segment where it's decided we need even more noble support, further like blurring these parts of the game together. We're diving back into the kingdom's feudal politics to try and get additional allies against Lacane, and no, none of this matters whatsoever, so I will skip over it mostly. However, what I will say is that skipping over it is a shame, because this is one of the best parts of the entire game. First, we go back to Daddy Tahar's castle/lab, and we have to storm it for a third time in recent memory. Currently, the undead controlled it for one reason or another, despite us capturing it from House Leonida only minutes ago. Then we have this quest where you meet the leaders of the main noble houses, and they have various reasons why they hate each other and will never work together. And perhaps they do dislike the church taking over everything, but they don't really want to fight against it, with a bunch of filthy elves at least. And you get this interesting quest that appears to have multiple outcomes that actually affect the gameplay. Obviously, I only got one of the outcomes, but just to check whether I'm lying this time, I went on the wiki, and indeed it does appear that at least partially it matters what you do and who you choose to support in this quest. With the caveat that, as I said before, none of this matters at all in the long run, as we'll see, but in detail. There's going to be a battle in a moment, and what you do here somewhat affects how that goes. Different units are made available to you apparently, although I didn't notice this at all, and you might even be able to fight against the nobles in the upcoming battle. I think the intrigue you pull is interesting, and it's worth looking into, not that it actually matters again in the long run. To simplify it, one faction wants a political marriage to Lady Mira, the noble leader we semi-mind controlled, and is currently part of our faction, to the extent that people are asking us to marry her. I don't know what they think we're responsible for this. I think it's because she's still, like, half mind controlled. Like, it hasn't worn off. She's not herself and can't really make decisions, so she's just, like, asking us to make decisions for her. Something like that's going on. And that does play into things, actually. Well, you end up with a marriage proposal and some poison, and you're asked, like, how to resolve this little political conundrum. You might think, oh, I can just play both sides. I can arrange the marriage to get the alliance, then kill the groom because the other faction asked for that, and then nothing will actually happen, right? But according to the wiki, if you try this, it doesn't work out completely because Mira becomes so distraught at even being theoretically forced to marry someone that she kills herself. And I really didn't think it would go there, but yes, as like a victim of massive mind control, she's probably a little touchy about having her entire life defined by some magical demon lord's whims. With the added subtlety that if you ask her about it, she basically shuts down and is really neutral, just saying she'll do it if she has to and doesn't appear to be against it. You need a bit of actual insight here to foresee that she herself can't be trusted on her own position due to the various pressures on her. I thought that was all pretty good. And while I still think this entire third of the game should just be removed, it's very well done in the fine details. Like, the game's production quality remains extremely high, so that's got to be said. What I did in the end was I listened to all the proposals and went through the various details where you can decide like whether one side deserves this or that thing and like see the reasons behind the houses hating each other. And when the final decision comes, I just did nothing. This is both a mix of fence-sitting and sheer hubris, because I firmly didn't believe that we needed to ally to the nobles, so I wasn't really willing to dirty my hands or just get into their messes. And there's another layer to, like, the nobles asking you to kill people to win their allegiance that maybe they didn't think about. Why would I want to work with them if they're like that? Like, if they just openly plot to kill people behind their backs and, like, kill their children or whatever they're doing, all their little schemes, do I want to be sitting at the table with them? Probably not. Well, soon enough, they'll all be ruled by me and my demons and my elves. So it'll all be fine, but my arrogance is quickly checked because it turns out some of the forces brought to this conference were aligned with the purity, and it turns into an ambush. An ambush in which me and my glorious heroes, who surely don't need any allies, are actually killed by a bunch of regular troops. So that's highly embarrassing, but as I've said, the real strength of the party is in its summons. Therefore, all I need to do is go back to a safe before the meeting, summon our stuff, then massively skip the dialogue so that the ambush happens before the summons timeout, and things will get off to a better start for round 2. Our bolstered amount of infinite health bars allows us to work our way through the ambush, slowly but surely. They had heroes and units with tons of health themselves, so it took a while to kill them off even after we outnumbered them. Again, a bad sign, isn't it, that those who pledge themselves to the enemy religion actually do seem to gain superhuman abilities. Keep ignoring that, everyone. God favors ours, really, probably. And God's plan is dumb anyway, like killing everyone who can do magic to make him come back isn't a good trade, because magic is so useful. Is God going to provide equally valuable services? He seems like a very careless and vindictive guy, and probably can't be trusted with his supreme powers. So once again, I think we should let Demon Lord Tahar rule the world instead, who, due to the limitations of the game not allowing a morality or choice system, actually can be trusted. He's ontologically good, because it's easier to program that way. He's just about the only leader who isn't insane, or secretly plotting to kill everyone in the whole game. Anyway, speaking of plotting to kill people, after the fight, we capture the guy who organized the ambush, and it's the prince of one of the houses, like the brother of the leader. You have the option to execute him for his crimes, but I decided not to, mainly because killing people is wrong, TM, he said, petting his health-born demons and dripping with the blood of 100 exploded warrior monks, and partially because it might annoy our esteemed guests. And yes, the leader of that faction is very protective of his brother, even though he just tried to kill us all, and he gets angry even when you say you'll take him into custody, but I guess he gets more angry if you kill him. I think I got the ultimately neutral outcome, where the other houses think we're all right. They don't dislike us, but they aren't interested in joining the army, so they just leave the map, and their bases become empty in the immediate RTS battle that follows. We'll need to run over and capture them for ourselves, which is what I wanted, I guess. And that's going to be aided by the aura setup I have going on. So let's talk about auras. I mentioned these before. It's this mechanic that allows you to transmit certain perks from one hero to others nearby. I have 3 main ones going on, I think, or 3 effects provided by various stacking auras, I think. One is an aura that continuously regenerates health and mana. The mana is the most important one, as we are at the point when I can't use up my mana in battle. It's regenerating so fast, it's always refilled by the time the cooldown on even the most expensive spells are ready. The second one is a resistance aura that transmits resistance to damage. This also affects regular troops close to the heroes, giving you like 20% less damage that stacks on top of all other things, leading to cases where tanks like Tahar and Iskrim get their average damage reduction to like 75%. And this also stacks with Elven Guardians, units that transmit a 10% resistance aura to all nearby troops, keeping everyone alive longer, perhaps long enough to get hit with more healing spells, and this is where things get more complicated and more powerful. So your 30% extra health effectively from the initial auras gets turned into de facto 100% extra health after the first healing spell has managed to go off if it wouldn't have gone off in the other timeline, and then 200% after the second time that happens. And yeah, timelines invoked, feedback loops invoked, all of these buffs actually provide more results than you'd think. This is one of the things, like in-game analysis and understanding mechanics, that you have to get used to. And it's the reason why, by the way, a lot of games will timidly give you 1% buffs that just seem so lame, like, 0.5% extra critical chance. It's because the effect on gameplay of tiny buffs is way bigger than what the number says. Like, you can abstract things away and model things in such a way that your 10% resistance to damage gives you 200% extra health, effectively, like through how that plays out and how the butterfly effect of that adds up. So well done to Spellforce, I guess, for not being afraid of that. They just let you become really overpowered and trivialize the game. And I think that's a good thing, because I like being able to do that, and it annoys me when you can't, and I don't like seeing the 1% buffs and stuff, even if there is some sort of good mathematically minded attempt to balance the game using such like pointless feeling rewards. It's not worth it, in my opinion. You're giving up too much fun to achieve balance, and I think it is worth getting mad at that as well. It sounds like I'm getting mad at both sides here, but really I'm praising Spellforce for being broken effectively. I think it's a good thing. The all-important third aura, the one you might have seen the most here, is that our movement speed is roughly doubled due to overlapping haste auras. That means we can Sonic the Hedgehog our way around the map, slamming our flags down on all of the sectors before the enemy even get out of bed. In only 2.5 minutes, we control half the map. I need to be careful not to build them up too fast though, to avoid going into resource debt, but once it all gets going, that will probably disappear very quickly. When we finally run into the enemy for the first time, we stop, drop and summon the armies of hell, and now it would be amazing to destroy this starting army here without having to make an army of my own. And it's a close call whether we can do that, but we just about can. This is a decent army. They probably started with this so as to avoid being rushed. And I guess it works because it takes another 2.5 minutes of fighting with just the heroes to kill them off, so that certainly slowed me down. But after that, I knew I was in the clear for a full boom and started dumping everything into sector upgrades and production, avoiding making an army myself. I could actually, by the way, have just rushed even harder and gone for their base here, but I was playing things a little bit safe. Only a few minutes later, we're at the famous upstream battle point, where I control most of the map and I only need to push 1 or 2 more sectors. But will I get stalled for half an hour this time? Finally, not, because we've rushed so monumentally quickly that surely the enemy don't have the production levels to do their usual tricks. I held off their pushes with heroes in the west and my gradually growing army in the east, and once I was pop-capped for the first time, I pushed in, and things went, well, they went like I always thought they would for the whole game, finally, like when it felt like I was delivering a final blow on a victory already earned, rather than a wrestling match with an undead squirrel for half an hour to secure the victory. We storm in, and our huge advantage gets a huge victory, and just that's that. Very simple. Boosted now by what I referred to in the first part as the Iana ICBM, which is finally active here. Not only does she run at double speed, which helps, but I gave her the Raise ability, a move that does absolutely massive damage to buildings. This is important because you can completely deny an enemy a sector by running in and killing only the sector control building. I probably knew that by now, that all other buildings shut down once the main one is dead. So if you can't take an area, you can at least just shut it down by only killing one building, and just using Raise once and running away will do that. And you can also use it on the enemy's capital sector building, which will win you the battle. That's even more important. So this is where the true potential of the ICBM wasn't taken up. Like, after that first win in battle, I could have ICBM'd into their capital and killed just one building to win the fight. But I was more methodical, I brought the whole army, I gradually killed my way towards the one building you have to kill, destroying all the other buildings. You don't need to do that, but it is kind of fun to destroy things, isn't it? So it's nice to just see yourself winning. Well, yes, we do win, that's the point here. Another step towards feeling some flow to the battles now. This entire fight was only 20 minutes long and only had about 8 minutes of final grind, so another big improvement on the last battle, which I already thought was pretty good. Perhaps it's even too fast here. We certainly didn't need all those resources and all that map control. You probably weren't supposed to win this quickly, and that's why all that stuff was there for you. We can now feel then that we're very much ahead of the game. And this is likely more of that stuff that changed my mind and made me decide the combat was good again towards the end of the game. It's a case where this combat probably only feels good because it's in contrast to the long and stressful grinds of earlier. So if you remove the bad, you might also remove the good. Like, if the game was just like this and just had this pacing, I'd be like, why is it so light on the RTS side? Why is it so easy? Why is it so quick? To put it another way, I've gone and got good, like as the gaming gods intended. So it's now in my interest to claim that the only way I could have this special fun I'm having now was if I had a bad experience before. Or there's the other angle, which is you just say the bad experience didn't happen. Like, you'd say that getting good was fun. The sort of get good denialist angle, which can exist sometimes. I don't know, at least my plot points seem to be better supported than my gameplay mechanical points. We totally didn't need those noble armies, did we? We easily could have killed all of them if they stayed. So yes, this world is ours for the taking. With all that done, we jump to where I thought we were already many hours ago. We'll take our army to move on Greykeep and defeat Lekain. This is done in several parts, and first is a decisive battle at a key road checkpoint in which you must deal with the Purity's main army. The dialogue implies the nobles would help you here if you recruited them in that previous thing, but we'll never know, I guess. A battle starts right away when you load the map, so no exploits or exploration here. We get off to a slowish start, exploring with the heroes all grouped together and claiming some territory. Soon enough I've worked out that the map is split into two halves, with bridges and rivers in the middle. There are even some built-in rush defences, where magic shields need to be disabled to get towards the enemy capital. But we're actually not going to rush all that much, as you'll see. This one isn't so easy. There are multiple enemy faction bases, possibly meaning multiple popcaps, with you having to fight the Purity, the Bane and mercenaries coming from different directions. After vaguely securing the side of the map that was mine, I tried pushing south, only to find that the enemy have the ability to summon paragons. This is the Purity equivalent to the Treant we can summon, the giant tree. A really giant thing, basically. Each faction has one. It's called a Titan, I think. At first it's not a problem because he turned right around and walked off after being summoned, so we capture this sector and then start to hold it against the constant pressure from all sides. And yes, a glance at the minimap will reveal how odd this territory is for us. There are enemy main bases to the west and east that are attacking on different cycles, so holding this place is a constant battle. But aha, the AI is up to its old tricks again, making a massive attack in the sector to the north, and that's where the Paragon went. It made a massive, presumably waypointed march, leaving the front line and then attacking again from a new direction. And I think that's pretty neato. Good AI. This big attack works, insofar as it forces me to stop attacking the frontline position and come back. I was frantically trying to avoid having my heroes get near the Paragon to avoid any instant death. That can be difficult as the AI wants to charge in. You can activate a defensive mode that prevents units from moving to join engagements, and I sometimes used this to keep the heroes more safe, but there was a slight problem. I had the control group set up such that all the heroes were always selected together, so activating defense mode would apply to all of them, which would mean Tahar and Iskrim can't tank as it stops them from aggroing targets, which can lead to Iria and Iana getting meleeed and killed. You're probably thinking, there is a way to get around that with a few extra clicks. However, I regret to inform you that this is far outside of my capabilities. One control group, one mode, endless problems. It's the only life I know. The good news is that the Paragon is vulnerable to status effects, so as long as the heroes are nearby, we can do the usual anti-boss thing from the RPG side and just kill it off soon enough. Once it's dead, I push back to regain the territory I lost dealing with that counter-attack. I even considered pushing a bit further, but you've probably noticed how new enemy units are constantly pouring in. We're back to that early game experience really, where it's going to be an uphill battle from here, with non-stop combat for a long time. And you might even catch a glimpse of there being another Paragon already standing in the next sector along. Yes, now the super units are also going to be endlessly spammed. They are expensive enough that they can probably only revive it like 10 more times, but that's a decent amount of times when you only have 45 minutes to play the game on a given day, like that's how I'm seeing it. We're not getting out of this fight anytime soon, maybe tomorrow, that's my mindset. To have hope, we need to have a group doing something, like doing some push while the fights are going on. And that's where Iana will once again save the day. Thanks to that raise ability I was talking about before, we can take out enemy sectors relatively quickly, even without siege weapons. And armed with the knowledge that you can safely ignore all the buildings aside from the main one, we can claim territory over here in the east, while technically ignoring the "you are under attack" messages, in the hopes that we'll get back to whatever drama that is before we lose everything. The timing works out, especially as the game has a very generous and rapid repair system that I had even bothered to learn the hotkey for, which means that the enemy's time to kill a building is multiplied like a few times over. Due to the repairing being so rapid, it takes a lot to out-damage it, and it's pretty cheap as well. I think I ranted about this in the first part somewhere. So we're losing ground, but not enough for it to really matter, whereas the damage we did to the enemy is more long-term. That's progress. But this occurred during a minute of suspiciously low activity, which can only mean one thing: the enemy were building to PopCap ready to spam me big time, and hence a massive battle quickly ensues at the previous front line. The front lines are so close together that our defensive towers are practically in range of each other on either side. Welcome to Fantasy World War I, shell shock included. It's a manageable grind, to be fair, in that we aren't actually losing here, just really struggling to break even. However, I think I'm doing a little better than I'm supposed to. Because you might remember there are multiple factions on the field today, so why am I only really fighting in one place? Well, the Bane faction I think were in the east, and I've mostly killed them already, like early enough. They didn't become a problem. I guess they only had 1 or 2 sectors, so their build-up time would have been way slower than the main Purity faction. I'm not even completely confident the Bane faction were even considered separate to the Purity. Again, I might be lying, but one faction that is separate are the Mercenaries in the west. And I'm pretty confident here that they have glitched out. If you look at the minimap, or have looked at this pretty much anywhere in this battle, you'll see there is a red splodge somewhere along the western front line of ours, and that is the edge of the mercenary army. The little bit of it we can see, it's just standing there. I can't find examples in this busy footage, but I'm sure I had looked over there and noticed it was just standing there, and I figured it had glitched. So I started building the sector away from them, as in putting buildings in weird corners to avoid aggroing them, and not putting any towers there that might draw their attention. What happened then was the mercenaries just stood there for the entire match, hence never clearing their PopCap to make new units. And yeah, there was supposed to be a whole extra front in this battle, like the whole western portion of the map was supposed to have stuff happening in it. And I'm 90% sure that a glitch in my favour has caused this to not only not be a problem, but actually makes the battle easier, because the mercenary faction is probably harvesting resources in the back line somewhere, and denying them to the Purity who are attacking me. So yeah, I'm giving this mission my all, and I think it's only an intervention by the gamer gods that's keeping me afloat. This is a hard mission. I was able to advance one more sector and choke point the Purity's main base area via a bridge, so that's nice, and I think the units that were generating the enemy's shields, preventing further advance in various places, were in that area too, so I can go kill them later when I have a moment. It was a few guys in a little castle in the north of that sector. I was also able to push east again in a moment of quote-unquote calm, and destroy what must have been the last of the Bane territory, if there was any Bane territory to begin with at all. The east seems to be fine, so we've got away with whatever that was supposed to be. And of course we're only achieving the time and leeway to go over there and do anything by sacrificing a ton of stuff on the front line. I've got this semicircle of 15 towers all around the bridge and the enemy's core sectors, and they can happily be killed off by all those raids and marauding paragons, since it's only wood and stone I'm really losing here. And that's extremely abundant. I guess workers die, but they respawn for free, so I don't need to worry about them. Hashtag bourgeoisie life. Now it's back to the upstream battle for a bit, as the enemy continue to pour over that bridge in the south, paragons and all. I stationed most of my troops there to battle them, but even as the enemy fall back, I don't pursue them yet as I had one more issue to investigate. I had bypassed a sector in my advance, as you might have seen on the minimap actually, and after going back to check it, yes, there's a purity base right there in my back lines that I somehow wasn't being punished for. I guess they were prioritizing building things like near their capital sector, allowing us to avoid any major disasters where they built an army in this fog of war patch that's right by our capital sector and then got up to no good with it. The heroes get to work clearing this area out, and the ignored frontline battle is now taking place at 2 or 3 locations by the looks of things. Well, I shouldn't complain, should I? It should be worse if my theory about the mercenaries is correct. We'll just keep on grinding on the defense because our hero team now needs to do some other business. First we take out some enemies in the very bottom right, some stragglers, but more importantly we go to the castle area, generating the shields that prevent our further advance. It's a really narrow advance around this spiral ramp, so taking the main army here probably wouldn't have worked. Therefore it's lucky our heroes are good enough on their own to handle all the stuff in here and stuff. Once the main mage at the back dies, you can head across the bridges to the other side of the map. I think if you went there before, there was some of that like white mist. Maybe it killed you like before if you went into it, or maybe it just acted as a wall. Well, anyway, we can now go down south because that's where most of the enemies are coming from, so I'll cross that bridge in particular. And indeed, we run right into the enemy army coming the other way, causing another confined battle that's kind of suiting us because our heroes can spam their area of effect abilities on all of the enemies' janked together stuff at once, causing mass damage, mass debuffs, and that's likely going to help this big janky battle end up being a really favourable trade in our favour, so we can push right on out the other side of the bridge. And indeed, going slightly up the river, we find very quickly we're in their capital sector. It's very close to the edge of that bridge. This is our chance then, so I push on in trying to get the kill, and things are very close, with us managing to half kill the capital building. The problem is that the enemy are still flowing in from the rest of the map, and our army is disappearing. I have a Treant arrive, but a bit too late, and it ends up so swamped with enemy units at its feet that it's probably attacking them rather than the building and not getting what I want here. I'm still trying to spam out rays from Iana, and we almost take out the capital with that, but not quite enough. We soon do take 2 hero deaths, and very nearly a third too. That's going to force me to run away because we're on the verge of losing the entire game, and I sacrifice what remains of my army to achieve this, and the Treant does a lot of good work as well, distracting the enemy. We lose everything except the Treant, who stands on the bridge for a while and defends it while I put another army together. Yes, the ability to endlessly spam units is now working in my favour, isn't it? Because the enemy now have to attack up my stream of spam. So within like 2 or 3 minutes we're ready to go again, and I make a more methodical attack, this time heavily securing the other end of the bridge, having a big bridgehead in fact, and a few minutes later we're chipping away at their capital building a second time. Only I'm reinforcing from closer, I've got more stuff, my positioning is a bit better too, we've got more stuff like up against the capital building to melee attack it, including the Treant hopefully. And things go better. Most important, of course, is that Iana is in there, who can just use rays every time it's off cooldown, and it chips away like a quarter of the thing's health every time we use it, and kills nearby other buildings too sometimes. Once we bring it down, well, it turns out the rest of the map was rigged to blow, including the humans, because they all just explode, because that's the rules of the game, baby. With that, we've managed to avoid fighting anywhere in the west part of the map and having to deal with it, so that's all very good. And we of course avoided fighting the mercenaries too, who are still out there by the looks of things. I don't remember if I still had to fight them after this when I went to explore the map, because I didn't film it, and I guess it doesn't really matter that much anyway. The only clip I saved of the rest of my exploration of this map was here, where I found this merchant in the corner who sold me this item. I can't even remember what it does. It was some really useful item that comes with the downside that it makes this weird sound effect. It was an item that like sends an aura or provides some buff to nearby allies, but every time it does so, it makes a really loud sound effect that kind of stacks. So if you have 3 allies nearby, it plays the sound effect 3 times on top of each other, making it way louder than everything else. There was some kind of build here, but you would have to tolerate a really annoying real-life effect to deal with it. So whatever that was, I probably didn't go with it in the end, and wasted tons of money buying it off this merchant, no doubt. Let me have mercy on your ears and go back to talking about the RTS stage in review here, because the main point I wanted to make, that was a pretty cool battle. I liked this final battle because it was intense and stuff. You know what? It was all the things I was complaining about the battles being earlier. But this time, this is the end of the game. This is when it should be like this. And the interesting point is that it feels like the beginning. The early stages are like this, where it's chaotic and you're fighting upstream for ages and ages, things like that. For this being the final battle, it was like, yeah, it was a massive, chaotic grind with huge fights, massive units. That's all good. Why is, like, the first Orc stage also like this? Like, it's as hard as the stuff at the start. It's hard to say because, obviously, I didn't know what I was doing back then, but it just felt really similar. And the mechanical difference between easy and hard stages is whether you can and do rush successfully. So, like, the stages are easy. If you can get enough progress in the first 15 minutes to avoid much of an upstream battle, it takes about 15 minutes for the AI to get its engine going and get to the point when it's making units faster than you're killing them, that key threshold, causing the upstream battle effect. And that's something that's similar between the beginning missions of the game and the final ones. In the final one, you weren't allowed to rush. In the beginning, I was too bad to rush. And by not rushing, I caused the bad thing to happen. So the answer might be to make the AI just cut you a bit of slack in a sort of reverse cheating sort of way, and not build its units as quickly as it could do. Because while you can kill them, it's kind of annoying to do so. This is a very difficult and delicate balancing point because you don't really want to make it too easy for the player, but once the player's kind of proven that they can kill a full popcap's worth of the enemy army, you don't necessarily want to throw it in 10 more times immediately after from a game design perspective. So you don't really want to have this upstream battle unless it's cool, unless it's epic. Like, there are so many small details here that makes this impossible to actually sort out. Like, you'd need to know, as the developer, if you're going to put in a system that prevented the enemy making more units if you think the players had enough of it, that the player isn't losing anything during the fights, that the player is winning all of these battles and the player is just experiencing tedium. How do you guarantee that's the case? How do you know the player isn't gradually being ground down by all the waves you're throwing at them? Because you, as the developer, don't really know how these RTS stages are going to go for the player. All you can do is set down the rules and see what happens. And you're not going to have very much control over whether the challenge you're giving to the player is threatening to make them lose or threatening to make them win slowly. And it's the sort of latter thing I'm complaining about here. It wasn't as if the AI was going to win, but it just made it really hard and annoying for me to win. And allow me to emphasize again, there's no easy solution here. There's like some sort of hyper-advanced Game Master style AI solution you could implement that can detect something that might actually not be very challenging to the player if it seems like the player is facing millions of challenges, like slowly but always winning. Maybe it's more tedious than challenging, something like that, and the Game Master could tweak it and say, oh, you've got momentum, the enemy will give you 5 minutes to do whatever you want or something, and you can just progress. Like, you've proven you can do the thing this stage requires you to do. Let's just require you to do it 15 fewer times, because it doesn't matter. Let's move on and do something else. This is actually a game and stuff. I don't know. I'm just mad at something. I'm mad, but I know there's no solution to the thing I'm mad about. So, in the end, I'm mad at the universe, mad at myself, mad at Aunir for keeping me immortal in this world where there's no perfect game design. Let's just move on. We now go to attack Greykeep, that cool castle town from the beginning of the game, where Lacane is currently hiding out, and we can probably end this purity nonsense once and for all if we go in there and kill him. Restore the crown to power, probably, maybe, possibly bringing us to power, possibly bringing the elves to power, possibly bringing the various rebel nobles to power, almost certainly fracturing the realm even harder into a state of even greater civil war. But you know, guys, we did defeat the Bloodburn. Remember that thing? According to Tahar in the game, he states that it killed quote-unquote thousands of people. Well, I just killed thousands of people trying to cross over one particular bridge. And I only had to do it because those people were supposedly planning on killing thousands of people themselves, or even more than that, to revive God, and then, for all I know, God was also going to kill thousands of people. Well, actually, God is the one making me immortal, so maybe he's not about killing people. Although that said, making the Demon Lord, who is killing people, immortal, might be a net negative, isn't it? Well, this game doesn't really have good and evil sides. It kind of supposedly does, but not really. You never see the good side do anything good, or the evil side do anything evil. It's just objectives for experience points. Don't worry about it. And with such a heroic speech made, we push on for glory. The attack on Greykeep isn't the massive siege assault you might have expected. Instead, it's a hero quest where you attack pretty much alone, while everyone else stands around outside. You might think this is an anticlimax, and I guess it is, but I was like, yes, finally, some endgame RPG content, so I wasn't going to complain for a second. There was a guy selling potions who got a lot of business from me, because I really sensed the game was about to end for real this time, so I figured I might as well just drink potions all the time like there's no tomorrow. And there really isn't, so drink up. Inside the city, there are occasionally these cages with people in them, and if you click on the people, an unusual UI element appears and gives them a name. There are lots of these, and one wonders if it's part of the game, or all just like a little joke. Can you rescue them? Do you get an achievement if you find them all? I don't know. There was something going on in here. The main action is that the Purity have troops stationed all over the place, and our hero party goes around killing them. You can see from the sheer amount of status indicators crowding the screen that I am spamming abilities pretty hard. I have basically infinite mana thanks to my build, and I'm just casting everything whenever it's off cooldown, focusing on healing, because even with this massively overpowered setup, the glass cannon nature of our heroes means they can still die, which is nice in that it keeps me on my toes, I guess. I can't attack move to victory, which is how things get by the end of most RTS campaigns in my experience, so you have to be very proactive. I think the RPG combat is enough micro for me, essentially. And because the RTS micro is usually added on top of all this stuff, it adds to the overwhelming nature of it. Like, although only really overwhelming if you actually care, or even notice that you aren't playing optimally. I get very paranoid about the possible consequences of not being at the performance ceiling when the feedback loops are blaring, and it makes me very sensitive to not immediately being the best player in the world upon picking up something for the first time. Added to by the fact I'll have to deal with people pointing out how much I suck on the internet potentially, and possibly using the fact I'm not an expert in the game to invalidate my experience in a way. Like, they'll say, oh well, this thing you didn't like doesn't apply if you XYZ expert knowledge goes here. That's happened a few times, and I'm left thinking, well, why did you think I would know that? And then I'm just spiraling even more into wondering how miserable I'd be if I don't have a 200 average APM and have a walkthrough on the other monitor all the time, stuff like that. It's like I can't say if something's fun or not because I need an expert here to tell me how to play the game in a fun way and then only commentate on that way of playing. And I don't know, I've internalized that at some point, so I always want to find that myself if I can. I think what I'm saying here is thank you to Spellforce for letting me become so overpowered. So overpowered I didn't have to really care about those things I'm complaining about there. Like, I didn't feel that uncomfortable by the end of the game at the very least. To some, this could be a criticism, but to me it was a mix of satisfaction and comfort to just become overpowered and for things to get easier towards the end. I think games should let you get overpowered. This is a general point I like to make, because so long as there's at least some work involved, it's fine. In PvE games, that is. I think the idea that a PvE game should be balanced in some way is a secret curse that infects game design, well, only really in positive feedback loop situations. In fact, what I'm really getting at here, the source of all these comments is specifically, I'm still mad at XCOM for secretly changing the chance for shots to hit. There's something where if you play too carefully, the game will just do stuff in the background to try and get you killed to stir up drama. And ever since finding out about that and seeing the code and stuff, I was like, well, I can never trust game developers to let me keep what I earn. We must seize the means of gameplay and stop the bourgeoisie skimming away the rewards for our successes. Something. That's why mods are good. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Yes, I write the notes, by the way, for my commentaries right after getting out of bed every morning, so that's why they don't make sense and why I don't often actually remember what happened in the games I'm trying to talk about. Well, yeah, we kill our way across the city for the second time, if you recall our prison break earlier in the first part. The giant crabs with their sacred sword are still here, and their untold story remains at the heart of the Spellforce deep lore. And I actually wanted to make a point on the lore here, so allow me to do that rant while I do the next thing, which was to kill 3 Purity commanders and get a key to Lekain's office, basically a bunch of mini-bosses. We find that some of the Crown forces are holding out in one of the buildings, and a commander tells us the Queen is just behind this temptingly ajar door. Tempting because the idea that we even have a Queen, or are actively restoring her rule, is something that is a current through the whole game, but is never discussed by the party or the plot. One thing that I didn't realise until the very end is that the Queen of this kingdom is in a coma, and I really feel like this was probably explained in another game, or we were supposed to know it somehow. I'm not sure about that, but this royal restoration plot happens just silently, alongside the main plot. It's actually the main thing that's happening in the kingdom. It's like the setting of our quest is the power struggle between the church and the state. And we're caught up in this because we used to be working for Lacane and fighting the state. If you recall, at some point, the tables completely turned. Now we work for the state and fight Lacane, and luckily not that many questions were asked, so we're still not considered a traitor or something, I don't know. And right in the very beginning, if you remember all the way back to the start of part 1, Tahar is actually a high-ranking officer in like the Kingsguard, like the elite, very close to the crown forces. He never mentions this, and the game doesn't really mention it either. It's just one of these things. I guess that's what I'm trying to bring up here. Our quest is happening alongside this bigger quest that everyone else is on, and we just sort of happen to be coinciding with it. We want to kill Lacane and rescue Tahar's mother, I guess, but do, quote-unquote, we want to do that? This is another point. After the Bloodburn was solved, both Iskrim and Iana, I would say, have no particular reason to follow you anymore. Like, Iskrim only wanted to find Melhandir, which we did like instantly, and now he's openly more interested in staying there and taking over the world than being like a tank in your stupid quest. And Iana was getting revenge for her ex, revenge against the Bloodburn, essentially. So after finding out it was all a mistake and the perpetrator got trapped in a magic amulet, maybe she should have other motivations now. You could say, well, they're with us because we're friends, but we're kind of not, and that's why it's unusual for an RPG party. I mean, Iskrim and I recently almost fought to the death over the mind control issue, and like, he openly hasn't dropped it, so he is our natural enemy. Like, right after this quest, Iskrim's the next main villain. And Iana is a pure demi-human psychopath who literally can't like people. She's lost that ability. And, well, I'll spare Iria from my ranting because she really is your friend and she hates Lacane for personal reasons, so her presence makes sense. Now, I'm not quite saying the party should disband or change as the plot changes for maximum immersion, just because of how infuriating and horrible that would be on the gameplay side, but then again, it would force me to use the characters I'm ignoring, wouldn't it? Everybody would complain about that change, so keeping things as they are would be the right call. I'm just going to point this out as a true avant-garde opportunity that would happen to fit neatly with how the game's story plays out. Anyway, I was left wondering who this queen was, that's the main point, and what our party thinks of her. We don't have an endgame in the same way that the NPCs do. We're not being like, well, we have to kill Lacane in order to restore order, or even to prevent a genocide. Tahar doesn't openly have any opinions on these matters because he's so neutral, he's so much the player's avatar, I guess. I don't know, there's just like this big aspect in the lore of what's happening in the main quest line that is commanding the entire plot, but is unmentioned. It's all backstory, despite being the front story. It feels like it needs to be a bit more shoved down my throat. I don't want to be sitting here being like, oh, there's a queen. Oh yeah, I guess she'll replace Lacane or something, like if we do this political coup that we're doing in the last hour of the game, when everybody else has been working towards that the whole time. I don't know. Well, it might actually be, I was thinking, more immersive for it to be as it is now, because if we're saying that Tahar essentially doesn't care, if that's what my criticism is, that even though he's like in the Kingsguard and should have a personal stake in all of this stuff, he never talks about it or expresses any interest in any particular outcome, you could say, well, that's intentional then, isn't it? So a more immersive way to portray his quest is just to never mention those things happening. You can show that they're happening in the background because I guess it's happening in the same rooms as the stuff that we're doing is, but it's unrelated. Tahar doesn't want to save the queen. He just wants to save his weird alien mother, kill Lacane, and then sit on his pile of experience points and go to sleep. That's his mission. So if you portray the game like that, then yes, I guess that's quote-unquote better. So maybe, in an artistic fashion, whatever I'm complaining about here doesn't really matter. Well, obviously what I'm complaining about doesn't really matter because you're watching OffED's Game Grounds. Here's a surprise boss fight against General Geralt, who just says something like, yeah, sure, I died already, but who are you to complain? And we end up fighting him again. So that's pretty good. He's joined by Anselm and Daddy Tahar, and all three of them prove pretty easy to take down, basically disappearing under a pile of status and particle effects before our oversized, oversummoned party. I guess they're ghosts or something. They don't look like ghosts, and no one questions this happening. It's just the sort of stuff that happens in this world, so we don't worry about it. And to follow on from that rant I was delivering yesterday, yeah, maybe portraying it as if it's no biggie. is the best approach, because Tahar himself doesn't care to investigate what power can perfectly reproduce a dead person. No uses for that, who cares about that? I mean, how can Iana create her doppelgangers while we're at it? The implication, which essentially is that anyone you ever spoke to could actually have been a projection or a ghost because they're indistinguishable. It's so deep, it's so disruptive. You can go through the entire plot and be like, oh, which people are actually projections? What if this person was actually a ghost? What if this person is just an indistinguishable doppelganger and the real person was trapped somewhere else? Who knows? Like, that's a sort of time travel tier plot hole opening device where you kind of don't want to have this be a plot element because suddenly everything's off the table. Whatever. A fourth ghost appears for a few frames there, disappears, and somehow we end up holding a magical amulet, which forms part of the key to Lekain's office. It comes with a bonus key to a treasure room in the basement, which didn't really contain anything useful as I recall. A shame because this treasure room was teased to you right at the start of the game when you escaped this building early on. And it turns out once you finally get in here, it's just some stuff. Like, we're too close to the end of the game to get new stuff and to have it be useful, so I don't know, it's too late for loot. Soon we have all the keys we need to attack Lekain, and we discuss the idea with the royal forces nearby. Iana cheekily brings up, we don't actually have to attack him on our own. Remember that massive private army we have? We could use it, I guess. And people finally agree. I think we were holding back because Lekain might run away or execute the hostages or something, like if we went in too hard. Now, though, we agree to bring the army up. At the steps to Lekain's hideout, inside this courthouse, Tahar gives his troops a speech, telling them to charge inside, be ready for anything. You are troops of the Demon Lord, and whatever comes through that gate, you will stand your ground. We're ready for the final battle for real this time, brackets final. However, we get anticlimaxed again because we're forcibly teleported away suddenly, and then appear in Lekain's boss arena, effectively. It makes me wonder if they once intended to have a sequence here, where you'd be given a number of units based on how many allies you'd gathered so far in the campaign and would have to go through some kind of gauntlet. But then again, maybe it would be a bad idea to have a positive feedback loop vulnerable challenge right before the final boss, since theoretically, like, either some players will get softlocked by not doing the optional missions, or to keep them optional, it needs to be easy enough that you don't need the extra units and therefore having them isn't worthwhile. Like, you can't really make this work. Perhaps some internal debate like that had steered them away from having a final RTS challenge, but they just kept it in the script anyway, so they talk about it happening, and then it cuts to it being over. Now Bertrand is again trying to convert us, and he's like, well, even though we have to do many bad things, it's worth it to make a paradise, and Tahar calls him out that the reason they think it's going to make a paradise is because it came to them in a dream, and that's not a reliable source. Bertrand is outraged by this point, and here's the thing, I mentioned this before, but in a world of magic and high fantasy, things coming to you in a dream isn't the worst source. It seems God is moderately real. He does give real prophecies that we've seen happen through dreams. Everything up to releasing our mother from that eternal slumber was part of a prophecy that came true, the original one that caused Lekain to want to release us in the first place. Lekain was right about that, as it turned out, and his source was, it came to me in a dream. And we are actually immortal, thanks to Aunir's rune, Aunir being God's name, the guy giving out these dreams. And it feels like Bertrand is genuinely frustrated that people would be skeptical about further prophecies that, killing half the population will create a paradise. There's still room in this plot for the purity to actually be correct, and to have been knowingly doing this ends justify the means because of magic genocide. Well, Tahar doesn't buy it, the other party members chip in that they don't really buy it either, and that's going to be the end of that. We don't get converted. Bertrand still, though, asks us to help Lekain summon God. Like, he's not quite getting what we're putting down here. Because even though we haven't fulfilled the prophecy or anything, it might be that our Shaper powers allow us to summon God anyway. And you can ask Bertrand if he's lying about all this, and he just says, why would I lie? Or something like that. And that's the end of that. It's probably all above board and not any kind of trap. You get the option to not kill Bertrand in this conversation, but as you might guess, you just kill him anyway. We then go over to Lekain, then Mother intervenes from her psychic prison in Lekain's amulet or something, hope you're following all this, to explain to us that what Lekain is summoning isn't God after all, brackets, or is it? He's summoning an ancient evil. He doesn't necessarily know that's what he's doing, but it's what is happening. It's probably a bad thing to summon it. So this is the plot's release valve, I think, to avoid the purity were actually right conclusion. The whole vision from God thing may well have been a vision from some unspeakable great one like horror we'll see in a second, So all of the prophecies, even if they appear to be true and the magic appears to be real, it was actually part of a complicated trick by the Great Ones to take over the world. Although you can also interpret it as it just being that summoning God without first completing the prophecy means you accidentally summon an evil thing, like without knowing it. So there's still the purity's kind of right interpretation here. We're not going to mince words with Lacane, we just quickly get down to owning him up in battle. Of course this isn't the real deal though, in his dying moments he completes the summon, and we end up having to face the so-called Spectral Horror, the game's true final boss. Again, you can interpret this, if you like, as being the one who is behind everything, and you can even ultra-interpret this as being Aunir, like this is God, it's this guy. Not what we expected, but how would we know, like this guy is from a different plane and such. So maybe God is a strange, tentacle-armed Great One, who was probably banished long ago by the Ancients and now seeks to return to the world as its Dark Lord, by granting intoxicating immortality and magic to those who serve the cause of his dark resurrection, such that his dominion over the world can be restored. And of course, he would tell his followers to kill all the mages first, wouldn't he? Because mages are the only ones who are able to reseal him and threaten his rule. So that could be what really happened. That's going to be my interpretation. Like, the purity did get what they wanted, they were just tricked because this guy wasn't all he was cracked up to be. And it all makes sense, I think, if you look at it that way. So I think the moral of the tale is this ultra-skeptic lesson, where even if God comes to you in a dream and tells you to kill everybody, and you're 100% sure that it's going to be a good thing if you do that, you still have to keep in mind the possibility that God is lying to you about this. You know, he invented truth and lies. He can do whatever he wants, so you do have to be careful with things people tell you in your dreams. I don't think that's what they intended the lesson to be, but I'm trying to become the Pope or something, so I have to come up with these interpretations. I don't think they'll let me be the Pope if I say that God is lying to you in your dreams. Not quite sure. Well, this is probably all a wry interpretation because we don't really get any information about what this thing is. Even the party themselves don't know anything or say anything about it, as we'll see. God told me in a dream to kill everybody, and when I didn't do it, he came to me in real life and started trying to kill me with his gigantic tentacles, and he was even able to summon more tentacles to attack me with during the fight. So that was strange. The bad news is that this guy can revive, like us. How funny. Aunir's rune, is it? However, his ability to do so is in some way tied to Shaper magic. In particular, our mother in the amulet, which we now possess, and Tahar's like, okay, quick, trap it. And our party members somehow get the ability to shoot ray shields from their hands in a previously unseen ability that probably would have come in very useful. Then Tahar destroys the amulet, killing what remains of our Shaper mother, and as it turns out, banishing the creature back to the bright, white and cloudy realm it appears to come from. God returns to heaven, if you like. And that really is that, because we immediately, with not even a quick conversation, progress to the most abrupt of endings to such a long and detailed game. It says in narration that all of the Purity supporters were hanged, which probably means we killed more people than the Purity themselves were proposing to kill. Very good. And the Queen was magically cured from her coma, and decreed that a new circle of mages be created to oversee and prevent any further possible magical apocalypse-type events. And of course they're going to invite us to be on that council because we stopped like 5 apocalypses during this game. We then have the final scene in which Iria and Tahar go to be on the council up in this castle and mention their concerns that Iskrim has gone back to his mind control plan as earlier threatened, and perhaps they'll have to keep an eye on him and it'll all be fine. It's all just jokes really. So, new job, new me, I guess. As for everyone else, well, there's no time for that. The credits are already rolling. So yes, not really an ending, as most of the characters' fate is completely unknown, and our 2 most chosen ones just get new jobs that will probably involve the story actually continuing. But that's all for the game. Suffice to say, I think they could have dragged this one out a little bit longer. At least have the party or the main characters react to or comment on what just happened now. Like, don't we have anything to say about that final boss? Even just throw in a, so that just happened, crowd laughter, or something. It's like all the game's dialogue is really detailed, and there's so much of it. But then at this critical moment, it doesn't have any. It's really strange. Combined with the army speech thing, where it looked like something was going to happen gameplay-wise at the end, kind of makes me think that a significant amount of the originally planned ending sequence was taken away at some point, and this little slice we have left is all that made sense given what had been taken away. I don't know. Just an end, not quite an ending. And the whole oh, we just killed 75% of the population off screen in narration, and that solved this religion being annoying to us. Right now we can go back to having the Queen rule over everything and rebuild her empire, and that'll be great. This is where I'm pretty sure the fact I don't remember Spellforce 1 or 2 is probably harming me, because I'm sure this game is either a sequel to or a prequel to those games in some way. It seems to be related. I have this idea that at the end when it was saying, we'll form the Circle of Mages, this triggers some memory where it's like, oh, in one of the other games, you play as the Circle of Mages, so this is a prequel to something that happened in a different Spellforce game, and it all fits together perfectly. I could go on the wiki again and look it up, but I'm not going to, because I think it's more pure to commentate with just what the game put down for me, and I have no idea what the game's talking about, so there you go, there's my comment. The game just stopped, but we're not going to stop because there is some more stuff to talk about as it turns out. As the game comes to an end, I catch a flash of the campaign menu and notice there's more to this game, so let's investigate a tiny bit. First, there's some kind of prequel campaign you can play. No idea what that is, didn't notice it until now, very good. There's also a DLC campaign set after the main story that adds more factions as well, I think anyway. Pretty common for games to have extra campaign content for sale, so that's that. But then I noticed there's also this journey mode option in the menu. Journey mode is like creating another hero, in the same world as the main campaign, but just before the plot events, I suppose, who will go on more mundane adventures. I started putting together some kind of male version of Iana for scientific research purposes, and then it presents you with a number of missions similar to the main battles in the story campaign, where really you're facing jazzed up RTS skirmishes with special conditions, and the challenge is, can you beat a pretty decent AI? First though, you have to go to Everlight and see the sites, where you can get party members and equipment. You can play this mode in 3-player co-op, I think, but since the click and fight system makes controlling 3 heroes really easy, it's not a big deal, I guess. What I wonder is whether having multiple players would allow me to get that distributed micro ability I wanted for the RTS stages, where somebody else is constantly making units and throwing them over to me, or vice versa. Or maybe you would have totally separate bases, I don't know. I don't actually have footage, but I did play the first few stages of Journey Mode on my own, and it's similar to the main game basically. Same kind of quests and dialogue quality, jovial antics, epic battles. It's all just things that didn't happen to the hero party in the main campaign, for one reason or another, but it's the same content, like it could have been in the main campaign. They just added the game again, in another mode, for some reason. The main difference is that you go back to the menu to select the next map, instead of the world map screen, and there isn't an overarching plot, at least not at the start, which is as far as I got, and I was impressed by all this, because it totally doesn't need to be here. It's just loads of extra content, at the same quality as the main content, and it just seems insane to me they would add this. They didn't need to, especially as I think it was added for free, like with the update that made this so-called reforced edition of the game. I guess I never had the non-reforced edition, so it feels free to me, even if the old version actually used to be cheaper or something. Well, that's that, so I'm not showing you that. There's a whole thing here, like, it's probably another 10 to 20 hours of content we're just going to skip over. There's also this other mode, which is like an arcade-style wave survival challenge, in which you level up heroes and really focus on builds to see how far you can get. The only footage I got of this is this tiny clip of me going in as Iana, realizing I can't do much at level 1 because in the main campaign I had most of her abilities unlocked from the start, and that's why she was useful. And then I do extremely poorly with a terrible level 1 Iana. I didn't explore this mode at all really, but yeah, there's also this. It's probably fun. I was done though, so I didn't really want to explore it. I was really feeling like it was time to play the next game after some 35 hours in the main campaign. However, the presence of this content means I have gone back since, and I can't bring myself to uninstall the game. I would play it even more if the AI weren't so good. That's literally my final review of the end game. I don't really have a moment in my life where I'm like, yeah, I want to concentrate really hard for an hour, and so I can't really commit to doing an RTS stage in Journey Mode or something. The struggles here of someone who wants to use non-work gaming time to relax, huh? Well, yes, Spellforce 3 lives up to my overall review from the very beginning. It's too good. The quality is through the roof for some reason, the graphics are amazing, the sound is amazing, the plot holes might all secretly be genius art portraying Taha's view of the world, if you will accept my cope there, and the AI programming is somehow among the best I've ever seen in an RTS campaign, possibly to the game's actual unironic detriment. There might be a reason why campaign AI is usually scripted or brain-dead. It's so that scripted brain-dead losers like me can play it without having to go full gamer mode, paranoid breakdown time, Uber Express, internet complaino style. And after all these hours of ranting, I guess I've said whatever I wanted to say about this game, so let's leave things here. Next up, I'll be playing another not especially impactful RTS with RPG elements that is otherwise completely different to Spellforce 3. It was a sheer coincidence it turned out to be similar in that it was an RTS with RPG elements. I didn't expect it to be. There's a whole load of ranting coming about feedback loops, because I'll be playing Terminator Dark Fate Retribution Revengeance or something like that, some 3-title game name. A vaguely modern RTS with a persistent army across the whole game, where all losses are permanent, and hence you can soft fail the last mission in the first mission, all that good stuff, and that's gonna be a feedback loop aphobe's gold mine, isn't it? I'm dreading going back in, but do join me for a breakdown of that game, coming hopefully soonish, as I want to make shorter parts if possible. Thanks for watching. Play Spellforce 3, it's better than I've made it seem, that's for sure.